This is Marie McCabe recording an oral history for Historic Madison Incorporated on January 17th, 1985, and I'm interviewing John Shaw. John, will you give me your full name and where you were born and when you came to Madison?
My name is John R. Shaw. My family moved to Madison. I was born in February 1916. My family moved to Madison in late 1917 or 18 because my sisters were about ready to enter the university, and it seemed better for the family to live in Madison. It was a matter of economics.
What did your father do?
My father was a newspaper man. He was a politician, is about the right word for pa. He was a postmaster at Ellsworth. He started out as he was county superintendent of Pierce County Schools. Then he became postmaster, and while he was postmaster, he bought the Ellsworth Record, which is a country newspaper in Ellsworth, which he ran for several years. Then he bought another newspaper in Hudson, and it was at this time about when the family concluded that they wanted to come to Madison.
And what was his full name?
John. I am the seventh John Shaw.
Oh, really?
Seventh consecutive John Shaw.
And so he came here as a newspaper man?
He came here, John Callahan, who was superintendent of the Department of Public Instruction, was a close friend. He was born and raised in Pierce County, as was my father. My father and mother were both born and raised in Pierce County. And John Callahan, when he became superintendent of schools, wanted my dad to come into the department. And he appointed him to some job. When he first came to Madison, he was editor of the Equity, which was a newspaper for farm cooperatives. It was published in Delavan, and Dad commuted back and forth, and we lived here. Then he was appointed to the Department of Public Instruction in probably 1921, I don't know the exact date, as superintendent of state graded schools. That was his job. And he remained there for the rest of his working life in the Department of Public Instruction.
What was your mother's maiden name?
My mother's maiden name was Lorena Carolyn Ralston. She was born in Diamond Bluff in Pierce County. Her father was the Pierce County Sheriff for many, many years. And I've told the story many times that my mother was born in the Pierce County Jail, which indeed she was. They had the jail and the home for the sheriff in the same building.
I see.
And her father was a farmer, as was my other grandfather. Grandpa Shaw was also a farmer. And interestingly enough, they both raised horses as sort of a hobby. But my grandfather raised Morgan horses, riding horses, and my other grandfather raised draft horses. They were friends, and that's how my father and mother met, was through the relationship of
the horse
my two grandfathers.
And you had sisters, you said?
Two sisters, Evelyn. Evelyn was born in 1898, and Merle in 1900. So if you look at my birth date, you'll discover I'm kind of a trailer type. And that's why we came to Madison early on.
And where was your home then? Do you remember?
When we first came to Madison, we lived on the east side, right across the street from Orton Park. I can't remember the name of the street. And I don't really remember that. Then we lived in Macoma, what is now Dana Road, a little rented house. My parents apparently couldn't find the kind of a house they wanted. They needed a big house because it was anticipated that my grandmother, my mother's mother, Grandma Ralston, was going to live with us. And with a family of five and Grandma, we needed a big house.
Your sisters stayed at home while they went to the university?
Well, in the 20s, everybody stayed at home. They were both members of a sorority, or they were both Alpha Chi's. They were both active and down, but everybody lived at home.
If you lived in Madison, you
Sure.
stayed at home.
Well, that's why, again, I think my parents felt that was the only way they could afford to send 3 children to the university was to live in Madison. I don't think my dad was particularly. I think he would rather have stayed in Ellsworth. He was very happy there. And it was a good newspaper. He had a nice life there. The house I was born in is a beautiful old house. A great big yard. And it was very pleasant. My grandmother lived right across the street, so I had a wonderful time in Ellsworth. I liked the only as we went back to visit.
I was going to say if you left it too.
I don't remember as a child, but as a baby. But
nice small town atmosphere.
Every summer we went back to Ellsworth. My grandmother stayed in her own house in the summertime, and then she came and lived with us in the wintertime in Madison. They rented their house usually to teachers in Ellsworth. That's how.
So in Nakoma you lived on
it was on Odana Road. It's a little house. The little house is still there, and I remember it vaguely. And then finally they found a house in Mango Park on Adams Street, 1900 block on Adams Street. It was large enough to. It had 5 bedrooms and a great big attic, which at one time they anticipated putting more bedrooms. They never did. It wasn't necessary. But it was a big nice old square high house in Mango Park.
Is it still there?
Sure.
What number?
1910.
Oh.
Been there for many years.
And that's a nice neighborhood to grow up in.
It was a wonderful place to grow up in because they had Vilas Park just a block away. And as a kid, it's interesting that my life and my interest in the Nature Conservancy and the Arboretum, for example, which is now almost an avocation for me. As a little boy, as a young boy, we used to camp in what is now the Arboretum. We built roads. We had bicycle trails. We being the neighborhood kids, Joe Jackson and Red Kelly, and Bill Harley, whom some of you would know, I'm sure, from WHA days, and Bob Hummel and Bud Cantwell and Bill Riley and all the neighborhood kids. And the Arboretum was our playground. We literally went over.
What was there then?
Nothing.
It was just woods.
And there was the old farm that was eventually there. That was an abandoned farm, as I recall as a child, as a little boy. I'm talking now when I'm from, let's say,
10 or something.
10 around, because we were old enough to build rafts and go across Lake Wenger, which was, of course, very dangerous.
Oh, I just assumed you rode bikes around.
No, we had rafts and boats. And our parents apparently were sort of agreeable to this. I remember I fell in once on a Sunday, and my mother was pretty upset because I had my Sunday school clothes on.
Wet.
And that didn't go over so well.
I don't suppose you had life jackets and cushions.
We had life preservers, I think you would call it. Yeah, we were not. We all knew the lake. We lived on the lake. We loved the lake. We swam there, and we were careful.
And it's not usually a rough lake.
No. We never had any. We never. Parenthetically here, Bill Riley was a very wonderful, successful attorney here in Madison. Riley. He was drowned in Lake Wenger as a young man. He was skating with his children. And I to this day, I find this hard to believe. He was drowned about 20 years ago. Where he was skating, we knew as children that it was dangerous. We never went over there because that's where the springs are. It's over near the Wenger Spring, near Boothie Courtney's little lookout. Right out from there. He was skating there. And he had a son who was old enough to skate by himself, and he had his little girl, and he was carrying her on his shoulders.
Oh.
And when he realized he was going through, we decided, picked the little girl up and pitched her.
Tossed her.
And when he came down, he hit his head on the forehead and knocked him out. And as a result, he drowned.
Well, would it have been deep there?
It wasn't particularly deep, but it would be deep. It was cold, and he drowned because he was knocked unconscious.
But from his your boyhood experience.
Never should have been there. His father, I'll never forget his dad. I'll never forget his brothers, John and Miles. At the time of his funeral, said, we don't know yet why he was there. It was just unbelievable. Well, it was a wonderful neighborhood for kids.
So you were essentially across the lake. You were out in the country.
Oh, sure. Well, we were in the country. We could go just from our house just up to Lincoln Street or to Edgewood Avenue, which wasn't a street when I was a little kid. We go down in the swamp behind Edgewood College. Along that drive, it goes around like it'd be 40 miles up in the woods as far as.
Was Edgewood there then?
Edgewood was always there. Yeah.
But one building, I suppose, at that time.
Edgewood was then a boarding school for little ones, and children were sent by their families to board there, and they went to school there. And well known to us. Our neighborhood was kind of a Catholic neighborhood. Lots of Catholics in our area because of our proximity to Edgewood.
Just like we are.
Sure,
in
exactly.
Queen of Peace.
And so we all knew Edgewood, and all. I always. I shouldn't tell it. My mother, she'll turn in her grave. When I was a little fellow and was really naughty, I was afraid of the nuns because, for a very simple reason, when the little kids from Edgewood went for a walk, there were two nuns in front, a string of kids, two nuns in the middle, and another string of kids, and two nuns in the bringing up the rear. And they marched. They didn't walk. They didn't shout. Or they just walked, looking straight ahead. And I'd see them coming, and I'd go across the street because I didn't want to get in. And my mother, if I was really naughty, I remember she would say to me, "If you ever do that again, I'm going to give you to the nuns."
Oh, well, that's good.
I told them.
Well, I think they're very foreboding anyway.
They were then.
In those black
they were in
habits.
full black habit.
And it's something very mysterious to children. It was to me too. I know you can't figure out.
I told that to Sister Marie Regis, Marie Stevens, a few years ago, and she just thought that was one of the funniest things she ever heard. And that's true. I said, "You're not a good boy. I'll give you to the nuns."
Well, I suppose you went to school in between all this
Oh, yeah, sure.
fooling around.
Randall School,
Mm-hmm.
and to Madison West. Barb and I, were in the same class, and we were the last class in Madison to start school in February.
Oh.
Because of the age situation. So we were the last high school class to graduate in February in the city of Madison. That was that was 50 years ago. But we were a very close-knit group, and what is interesting to me today is that among our close personal friends, most of them, we all went to school together, Randall School and high school, and we're still here. This is
That's the wonderful part about, and it doesn't happen too often.
Very seldom, and there's so many
childhood friends.
We've been together all these for
Now those boys were all neighbors in that.
All neighborhood, yeah. And the Wilkies that's my original acquaintanceship with. The Wilkies lived on Keyes Avenue, and they were part of this group that used to. We had games in those days, and we played soldier, and we had communication systems. Joe Jackson and I, that's Colonel Joseph William Jackson's son, Joe, who still lives in Winter Park. We had wires strung in telephone lines, and we could talk to each other. We were all interested in amateur radio. We all had first
These
crystal sets, and then we had what we call peanut sets, 1 tube sets.
Oh.
And some of the kids, Dick Nelson went on and became a AM radio operator. Russell Morris, Russell, he's a conservative type. He was Joe's brother-in-law. He's a very distinguished ham operator, and he started in those days.
Did all of these fellows, your companions, go on to school eventually? And
most of my friends, a few left Madison, but nearly everybody ended up through high school and went into the university. Here, very few of us went away to school because we were Depression children.
Mm-hmm.
This was a middle income neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. But they all had assumed they would go on to school.
There was no question. There was
not
never
a working class
none of us.
neighborhood.
There were some next door to us. Our closest and best friend neighbors were the McCoys. Andrew McCoy worked for the Northwestern Railroad, and there was some time it was thought that his son Jim would go to work for the railroad. Well, Jim ended up working for me at the co-op, and is still there. So all these wonderful connections, neighborhood family connections, formed lifelong.
Everybody was fairly comfortable, even in spite of the Depression coming later, I guess.
We were all hurting during the Great Depression. And yet nobody was hungry, nobody was hurting terribly, but we didn't have anything extra, any of us. And that went for the whole neighborhood.
They all continued to have jobs of some kind.
Almost, I can't remember of anybody who was unemployed, who had something like going relief.
It was some of the advantages of Madison, and that
well, this is a government
didn't
town.
hurt as much as some places.
My dad became very ill in 1931. The same thing that I just got out of the hospital for. He was terribly ill, and he was off for 2 years, and that really hurt.
Mm-hmm.
But the girls were out of school. Then
were they earning? They had jobs?
Oh, sure. Both Evelyn got a job immediately after school. She went to Two Rivers and started teaching. And Merle got married. She married Marie McGowan. You've interviewed her.
Mm-hmm.
And he at that time was tremendously successful. He had an automotive supply business. McGowan Lee Company here in Madison. But he went bankrupt in the Depression. He was the only one in the family that really had a small disaster. He had to move into his mother's house on Madison Street. And Marie and I and Cliff Connery and others, friends, kind of remodeled the upstairs into an apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they lived while he got
that was
remodeled.
fairly common. Mm-hmm.
And he grew up with Tom Coleman. He's a Madison native. He was born in Madison, Murray. And Tom Coleman was a close boyhood friend of his. And Tom, this is in the pit of the Depression. Murray had tried several things unhappily and unsuccessfully. He sold for an oil company, I remember, because that was related to his business. Anyway, Tom said, if you will go to school and take accounting, Murray was a graduate of the University of Wisconsin in 1917, and he planned to go to law school, but he got drafted and went into the service and never went back and got into this automotive thing. Tom said, if you will go to school and take accounting, I will get you a job as a cost accountant at the Madison Kip, which was what he did, and Murray worked there the rest of his life.
He did fairly well there. Well, it sounds like you remember having a very happy childhood.
I had a wonderful childhood. I now being a parent and a grandparent, I look back with great sympathy to my mother.
Oh.
My mother was 45 when I was born, and she had a terrible time coping with this kid.
I suppose you spent a lot of time with the neighbor kids, and they at your house. And,
yes, yeah, but mother was this was hard on her. She wasn't. She had her sister Maud, my Aunt Maud, wonderful woman. She had a lot to do with the bringing up of my sisters, and my grandmother, of course, lived there. And then the interesting thing is, probably the mid-20s, we were well established on Adam Street. My grandfather, my father's father, came to live with us too. So this got pretty squeezy. Well, John George. It was John Franklin, John George, and John Ralston. They were quite a group. But anyway, and I was, of course, Little John. Anyway, with my grandfather and my paternal grandfather and my maternal grandmother and my sisters were, one of them, Evan, was gone. Merle was probably still alive.
How did your two grandparents get along together?
Fine, but as my dad used to say, chewing on his cigar, don't say get married until we get a bedroom back.
Oh, they didn't get along quite that well, though.
No, there was never any. They liked each other, they respected each other, and they'd known each other all their lives.
Oh,
They had known each other for. Bob Ralston, my grandfather, and my grandfather Shaw were close friends.
Oh,
as I said, that's how my
That's right,
parents
with
met.
their horses.
And so they had known each other for many, many years. No, there was never those things were done in those days. You see, there were no nursing homes. My grandfather and grandmother both died.
Did your grandmother help around the house? Did she help your mother?
She was a marvelous. My grandmother kind of managed the household. She was sort of the principal cook. She was a wonderful seamstress and did a lot of things. She made that hook rug right there. It was made by my grandmother.
Oh.
She's been dead for 30 years or more, 40 years.
Well, was your mother active in the community at all? What did she do?
Essentially, no. She was not active in the community. She was a very active participant in Christ Church.
Presbyterian.
Christ Presbyterian Church downtown. She was an excellent bridge player. And she loved bridge, and she played with two groups of bridge players. Even played a little duplicate.
Gee, that's surprising. And this was contract bridge in those days?
Oh, yeah. Well, later on. But the only thing that I ever remember her being involved in particularly was the YW, a little bit. Merle, my sister Merle, was very active in the Madison YWCA. But mother was strictly a homemaker.
But she got along well with her mother?
Fine. Oh,
That
they
doesn't
were
always
very.
work out.
Oh no, they were very close.
Oh, that's good.
Very, very fond of each other.
And of course, housework was a little more demanding in those
Very
days.
different than it is now. I can still remember my father grumbling when we had to take the damn carpets out on the lawn. We had a great big side yard, beautiful yard, and we would take the carpets out and hand beat them.
Yeah, in the spring.
Did I ever hate that job? But we did.
And did you help at all around the house?
I had chores that were not really household chores. My father had a thing about shining shoes.
Oh.
And I shined his shoes, and I washed the car every Saturday if the weather was anywhere near.
Mowed the lawn?
Yeah, I mowed the lawn.
And some snow shoveling.
Started the snow. Well, in those days, they had a big horse and a big plow that came by and plowed the sidewalks.
Oh, really? You didn't have to do your own?
Well, we had to help because.
And right up to the house.
Yeah, and up to the house and the porch and so on. We had a great big front porch and a great big back porch, and there was a lot of other stuff with it. But I had to keep my room had to be in sort of orderly fashion. That was a house rule.
Did you have a coal furnace?
Oh, of course.
Did you shovel coal?
No, my dad took care of that. Unless he traveled a lot, and I helped, and but my mother usually fired the furnace.
Oh, she did.
And I hauled the ashes out.
Did you have a garden?
Yeah,
I mean, did your parents have a garden?
But that we had, I'll never forget the guy. I can't remember his name, but I can see him to this day. He came out and spading. He came every spring and spaded the garden. And then my grandmother ran the garden. My grandmother was a marvelous gardener.
And did a lot of canning, I suppose.
All kinds. Our house was built, 1910, was built by Fuller, a man who later became either director or assistant director of the Historic Museum. And one of his objectives was to try to plant every kind of a plant that was native to to this part of the country, which of course was insane because
I tried to do that at the Arboretum.
yeah, we couldn't do it in the
You need that
Arboretum.
many acres.
But we had plum trees, apple trees, gooseberry plants, currants, raspberries, all that kind of stuff, and a big garden. And,
So you had a big lot then?
Yeah, it was a big lot.
Did you have a garage?
No, we didn't have a garage. We had we rented a garage a block away, and it was the reason my father never built a garage was because we had a heated garage.
Oh.
It was just marvelous. And see, in those days, in the 20s, you put your car away in the wintertime, or at least our friends all did. You didn't drive your car in the wintertime. You took the bus, or the streetcar then.
You couldn't count on the car getting started, I presume.
Getting started, and the streets weren't plowed. It was terrible driving.
Do you remember the first car that your family had?
Oh, sure.
What was
The
that?
first car, I remember the car, the 1916 Rio, and I got a picture of it sitting right here.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
I'll show you. He had Ford before that. So we had Fords until this was his first big car.
Is that you sitting
me.
there?
My two
You
sisters.
about 2 years old there? One and a half?
No, I was about 6 months old.
Only 6 months?
Because that was taken in 1916, so probably I was born in February, so it was probably taken in the spring.
Yeah, you're probably still in dresses there.
Well,
Well, that's pretty cute.
here's another one more.
This is a picture of an open sedan with 4 people sitting in it, and John Shaw, baby on. Is that your father's lap?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And that's your sister in the back, I suppose.
There's
your mother?
the family. A little later on.
Oh, yeah.
So you can see how much older my sister was. They took care of me more than my mother. My mother was, I think we would call her today a woman, and I say this with deep respect and with all the kindness I can muster. I think my mother was suffered from depression. We didn't call it that, but she was very, she cried a lot.
Oh, she did. Well, your sisters look charming and look like they're delighted with you.
Beautiful girls, and they were wonderful girls, both of them. I was very fond of both of them. Evan, of course, just died this year ago this month.
Well, that is a sweet picture of you. I can see why you grew up to be so handsome.
No, why I grew up to be so spoiled is what you mean. We're chasing this around a little too long. I had a pleasant, happy boyhood, and Wenger Park was a wonderful place for kids.
I wanted to ask you about that. What was at Wenger Park in those days, in the 20s?
Well, the one block on Monroe Street was the 1800 block with the drugstore. They're still there. There were 2 grocery stores, the Hearst Grocery and J.F. Emery's grocery store, and Menzies drugstore, and Ferguson's Bakery, and Wilhelm and Gillis hardware store.
This is in Monroe.
1800 block of Monroe. And a couple of other smaller shops.
There was a meat market there when
Jordan, Jordan, sure. And then Tony Mack had the one up in the next block, and Kane Ashcraft. And that was the business district in those days. And Hilsenhoff Shoe Store. Now, it was a very nice neighborhood and a friendly neighborhood.
Well, in the park itself.
You mean at Vilas Park?
Vilas Park. I beg your pardon. Well, this was the zoo there?
Sure.
Pretty sizable little zoo at that time.
Very much like it is today. The Lion House was there. The Monkey House is there. That were there when I was a child. I remember them building the Monkey Island, for example, which is still there. The newer buildings, of course, would have been just built in modern times, weren't there? But it was a zoo, very much like it is now.
And as popular with
I think so. I think probably more so, because on Sunday you go down there and there'd be hundreds of people having picnics. It was a place to go. To me, thinking back...
you could get there by the streetcar, I presume.
Well, we could walk, of course.
Yeah, you could, but other people
No, streetcar was a long one. Because streetcar came on Mill Street and on Monroe Street, so it would be a long walk. You'd get off at Grant Street and walk to the park.
Mm-hmm.
That would be 6 blocks to the zoo.
Well, Mills isn't too far from
And
there.
then Mills would come in the other way.
Mm-hmm. But people did come in their cars.
Oh, yeah, sure. I don't, everybody used a streetcar. A streetcar was a common. I went to Sunday school in the streetcar. My parents went to church at a different time when I went to Sunday school. And we all, the kids, all of us who went downtown, rode the streetcar.
You did, I presume you did your big shopping downtown in spite of these stores that were out this way.
Van Arsdale, just remembered the name of the, there was a dry goods shop in there.
Oh.
Mrs. Van Arsdale. I'd forgotten all about her until right this split second.
But for clothing and
downtown,
big
we
items.
shopped at Karsten's and at Harry S. Manchester, and before that, Keeley Neckerman. I can vaguely remember Keeley Neckerman when it was on the corner where Wolf Kubley's big store is now. It's going to be the
Burdick and Murray was around there somewhere.
Burdick and Murray was the store that I'm thinking about.
Oh.
They were the ones that had the money carrying things that went on the trolley.
Oh,
around
yes,
the store.
sure.
You could, the clerks never handled any money. Pulled the lever on it, to be honest. Made the change up there. Keeley Neckerman, Burdick and Murray. There were grocery stores downtown. The fine Piper Brothers was a beautiful grocery store.
I've heard about that.
That was a fine store. One of the things that
They delivered though, didn't they? So
everybody did.
you could call up and order things.
My mother went to the store and picked out her meat and told them what she wanted, but it was always delivered.
Oh.
And I worked off and on weekends and so on at Jordan's as a delivery boy, drove their truck and helped the delivery guy.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a regular route, and, especially on weekends. They were very busy. I just remembered talking about the streetcar. My father worked every Saturday morning, but he got off Saturday afternoon. And we often went. Now, the girls are gone now. I'm 10, 12, somewhere around there. Mother and I would go down on the streetcar to Pa's office. We would go to lunch at either the 4C cafeteria. That was
4C?
4C. That was the 4C College.
Mm.
I don't know whether, I can't remember where the 4C came from. That was on West Washington Avenue. And we'd have lunch there, and we'd go to the Strand Theater and see a movie and vaudeville.
Wow.
And then also we would go to the Piper Cafeteria, which was on Mifflin Street, just beyond the...
Where was your father's office?
In the Capitol.
Oh, in the Capitol,
North
in the
Capitol.
public instruction.
Sure.
I see.
Part of public instruction.
Well, that was a big day.
And then, but what fascinates me as I think about it, we would walk home. That's a long walk. That's 3 or 4 miles.
Oh,
But
yes.
that was a sort of, unless it was raining or something.
Mhm.
And then if it was, we would take a streetcar.
Well, it was only a nickel on the streetcar,
Nickel
wasn't
for
it?
adults and children. Then you could buy tokens, and they were even less than that. I think they cost about 3 plus cents a piece.
Mm.
Oh, tremendous, wonderful transportation. A little flat wheel Montgomery ran a very good streetcar system.
It ran often, I suppose.
Well, I don't remember very. I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I went to my dad. I forgot something. My father worked in the North Wing on the Capitol on the 2nd floor. And you know, you go in the Capitol today, you can't tell what wing you're on. And this is a gospel truth. This is not Shaw hyperbole or Irish bull roar. This is the truth. I never could find the steps. I used to go downtown to the Y after school. I would go to the Y and swim or do whatever you do with the Y, and then I'd go to my father's office and come home with him. I'd get lost in the Capitol. And I went out, I finally picked out which stairway was his, these big wide stairways, the big stone stairways. And I went out and got a little ball of mud, and I threw it at one of the globes. And that ball of mud, now, this is the truth. The Capitol, remember, was lighted by direct current.
Oh.
They didn't use the city alternating current system. They had their own light plant.
Oh.
And down on Main Street. And bulbs never burned out if you used direct current. So bulbs and the globes were the things were hardly ever washed. They were never washed. They were dusted off with feather dusters. And that ball stayed there for about a year. Then it fell down, but the round mark, it was about the size of a dike, was there for years. And finally, my father told Governor Walter Kohler Sr., he said, I want to show you something. He said, that globe hasn't been washed since John was, about 7, threw that
little mud ball up
and
there.
the next day, he came down and he said, they cleaned the globe.
Well, you must have had pretty good aim if you could hit the one you
Well,
wanted.
they're great big globes.
Mm-hmm.
They're still the same globes there.
Did you play a lot of ball when you
We
you and your
played-
friends?
Basketball was an unknown to us. We played football, which was in the form of touch football, and we had rival teams. We played the Ice House gang, and those were the people who lived. There was a great big Conklin Ice House,
Oh.
at Monroe Street and Commonwealth. Huge, enormous place. And then the Wilkies had their gang. They had by then moved to Forest Street. They had a football team. We had a football team, and then the St. James, the Catholics.
Was this organized at all, or just
just kids.
sort of sandlot?
Just a sandlot.
Mhm.
And then we played a lot of baseball, and those teams were sponsored.
Oh.
And then with junior leagues and senior leagues and city leagues,
Oh.
but they were sponsored by the dairies
Merchants.
and
I
merchants.
see.
So
Mhm.
we
Did you have
played a
any
lot.
uniforms?
No.
No shirts or anything in those days?
Well, later on.
Mhm.
I was as tall as I am now, and I weighed about 140 pounds, so I was
Oh.
a pretty poor athlete. Although I did make the Madison West High School football team in my junior year, which I was very pleased about.
You're over 6 feet, aren't you?
Oh, yeah, I was six, but then I was 6'2 3/4".
Yeah.
But when I was in my senior year, I'd gotten interested in plays, and I loved plays, and I was in a lot of them at West. I went in to tell Willis Jones that I was going to drop football to be in a play.
Oh.
And he said, "You're going to what?" And he says, "You must be out of your mind."
Well, I expect you would have been a great candidate for basketball if they had had.
I couldn't. I have very poor coordination,
Oh.
and I was a terrible basketball player.
Mm.
And we had Dick Bardwell, Gene Murphy. We had some good. We had a good basketball team in those days, and I just couldn't. I couldn't do it. I was a lousy basketball player.
You hadn't put your legs and your
I
arms together.
I was very gangly. I was not a good athlete. I was a good swimmer. I was a fine swimmer. Pete Forsythe, Dr. Oscar Forsythe, taught me to swim at Camp Wakanda. He was one leg. And,
Oh, really?
He was then. He lost his right leg in an accident.
Did you go to Camp Wakanda regularly?
No, I would say regularly, but I went several summers.
For a couple of weeks?
Usually 2 weeks, and then I often got summer jobs in dishwashing or helping in the kitchen to give me another 2 weeks.
Did your friends go there too?
Almost all of us went to Camp Wakanda, and then our rich friends went to Manitowish.
Oh.
And rich,
Mm-hmm.
but and I went to Manitowish one summer as a canoe instructor, and I had a wonderful time that year.
All summer? You were there?
Not all summer, I would say 4 or 5 weeks.
So you canoed. Did you have your own canoe?
Oh, no.
I just wondered. You said you crossed Lake Wingra in boat.
No, we had rafts.
Uh-huh.
And
Maybe some rowboats.
Bill Harley and Bob Hummel built flat-bottom rowboats. Bill Harley and who else? Bud Campbell and somebody else. They built a boat and took it up to the Wisconsin River and went all the way down to St. Louis on the boat that they built. But these football and basketball games, those were fun games, and we had no referees or anything like that. But they were very spirited.
And where did you play?
Vilas Park.
At Vilas.
And then when we played the Wilkie gang, those terrible Wilkies over there, that would be Ed and Mac and Horace and Jack and the whole family were on the team, plus Glenn Frank Jr. and Freeman Eagle and played on in one of the pastures in the University Farms.
Oh.
That was another of our favorite playgrounds at the University Farms. We played hours over there. See, in the summertime, we went swimming. We didn't swim in Lake Winger because there was no beach. We went to the Willows. That meant we walked from that's a couple of miles. So we had stops along the way where we knew people.
Didn't you have bikes?
We all had bikes. I loved bikes. I had 2 or 3 of them.
So if you went over there by bike, it
often we walked. See, everybody walked everywhere.
Yeah.
See, it was common. It was over a mile to go to Randall School, and I went over in the morning and came back for lunch and went back in the afternoon. That's over a mile. So I walked 4 miles a day.
But you did ice skate at Lake Winger?
Just hours and hours and hours. Skate sail. We had built skate sails and skated. Then the most wonderful kids experience, Grandpa Nielsen. How do I describe this? The Farbach family. This is the Farbach Brewery. A lot of them lived in Winger Park, in our immediate neighborhood. And they married, 2 Farbachs married Nielsen girls, and they were the prettiest things you ever saw in your life. They were beautiful women, girls, women. But their father, Grandpa Nielsen, never did know what his name was. He was a photographer here in Madison years and years ago, Nielsen Photo Studio. He loved kids. He lived at Edward at the mailman Farbach's house. He loved kids. And he did all kinds of things with all kinds of boys and girls. He had a Madison-style ice boat, a small model. I don't know if you know what a Madison ice boat is.
No, I don't.
It's the fastest ice boat ever built in the history of man. And he had a small model of it. There were only about 10 of them ever built. And there's only 3 still in existence today, 1985, that I know about. 2 of them burned. The best one, the Alice, was the Fitz Youngbus boat, burned in Madison just not too many years ago, lost in fire. He took us ice boating on Lake Monona, Lake Wingra, and Lake Mendota, occasionally. He had what he called the Farbach Shack, was out on the 6 Mile Creek on the other side of Lake Mendota. That was a duck hunting shack. He took the kids out there. He showed us different kinds of ducks, different kinds of grasses. He was very interested in nature.
He was the photographer?
He was the photographer.
But when did he find time to do this?
Well, he was retired, and he was a grandpa.
Retired.
He was a grandpa. He taught us about birds.
Oh, how wonderful.
And, of course, then at Camp Wakanda, I was selected to go to Lake Koshkonong to meet the wonderful old man. Bob would remember him. He remember his name. He was a self-taught naturalist at Koshkonong. His name is gone from me at the moment. And we opened up an Indian mound. Legitimately legally, and found some interesting things. And so I'm amazed now at 68, going to be 69 like next week. Not possible, you understand. I'm actually about 43 or 40. I have all kinds of experience with natural things at the time, and I didn't even know about it. I didn't know.
You were exposed to it.
I was exposed to this. My father, incidentally, got, in 1930, I just happened to notice this because I was looking something up the other day. In 1930, the Wisconsin State Journal gave him an award, or as a picture in the Wisconsin State Journal, for the work that he and another man whose name I can't remember, George Drury, I think it was, for the work they had done in making people conscious of the birds in Madison and how important it was to the community. And he was given something like, his picture and stuff was in the journal, and an honorable mention for it. Now, I'd kind of forgotten that my dad was interested in birds.
I was going to ask you where you started getting interested in birds.
My real interest came when we were married, Harv and I, 43 years ago. One of our presents for our wedding was a honeymoon cottage on Lake Michigan shore belonged to Bess Ellis, a friend of my sister Evelyn's. And it sits up on top of the wonderful, wonderful bluffs just out of Kewanee. And there was a cottage down below, and that belonged to friends of hers, but she owned a great big double garage, and then she put a second story on it, and had this little tiny cottage up on top of the bluff, so that you're looking right into the trees. And we got and we were married in June, and she and Barbara and Pink Swenson, Swenson Madison, they're also old Madison people, used to take Barbara up before we were married, and they went birding every spring, and they just sat on this deck of this wonderful place and looked at the birds, warblers and so on. It was just a marvelous place for birds. It still is. We've been there many times since. But that was her wedding present to us, and that's where I got intrigued with the fact that there are a lot of birds.
But you must have known, and you must have been exposed to them, and a latent interest.
Colonel Joseph Jackson, for whom the Jackson folk in the Arboretum was named, was Joe. His son Joe was my probably as a young boy, my closest friend. Joseph William Jackson III you'd almost say he was a cripple. He wasn't a cripple. He had a disease. His bones were very brittle, and he couldn't do a lot of things that the rest of us could. And I was kind of you say it was nice to take care of Joe. The Jacksons, the whole Jackson family, this is Dr. Reg, Dr. Jim, Dr. Arnold, and of course Joe, Bud Jackson. They were all known to me and to my family. And my father, Dr. Reg Jackson Sr., and my father were close friends. Arnold Jackson was across the street neighbor. And the Jacksons were a family. My family was, again, I say this kindly, but we were rather austere. My family didn't laugh a lot. That doesn't quite right.
And of course, you were sort of a child alone in that family, so you didn't have a lot of people to have fun with.
I didn't have all the brothers. Well, anyway.
They were dignified compared to you.
The Jacksons lived at 2010 Adams Street. That's exactly one block from there. And they had 5 girls and Joe. And they were lively and a lot of silly things going on there. And the family fascinated me. And they were very good to me. So it was a reciprocal thing. I mean, they did things that my parents didn't do very much. They went on a lot of picnics. They would go over to the Arboretum and camp out. My family would be caught dead.
Well, it's a little different if you have 6 young children and if you have this one little boy.
So, my relationship with Joe, you make it sound like I was kind. It was a very happy relationship because he gave me a new perspective on a lot of things that I didn't have. Furthermore, he was very skilled in radio, which fascinated me. And he had his cousin Reg Jr., who now is the owner of Second Point. That Dr. Reg, he had a most fabulous on Carroll Street in the old Jackson, Dr. Reg Jackson Sr.'s old house on Carroll Street, which is still there and still owned by Reg Jr. He had the whole 3rd floor was nothing but, I won't say toys, but he had train sets, he had all kinds of things. The whole floor was devoted to Dud, as he was then known, a terrible nickname, but he was Dud Jackson. And it was a fascinating place. Well, through Joe, I had an entree to this magic land of electric trains and sailboats.
Well, it's like kids enjoying going where, like our kids wanted to go to friends who had television.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have it.
Same concept. Oh, we didn't. You brought up something. I had a radio in my room for years before my family had a radio. We didn't have a radio. And I remember that buying it. They bought an RCA Super Tetradyne. I can see it. I know it. If you put it in a room with 10 just like it, I could pick ours out. We didn't have one of those for years. We couldn't afford it. Now, I don't know how
Well,
I don't
about
know
the
how
time they were
poor we
becoming
were.
popular to have those was Depression time. And it was years before we got a little Atwater Kent, I remember.
I don't remember. You see, I am not conscious ever in my life, except that I couldn't get something. I remember we were talking earlier about a bicycle. Did I have a bicycle? Yes, I had one, but I wanted one for an awful lot longer than I got it.
Oh.
And I got it because my Grandpa Shaw went with us. We went to the Hess Bicycle Shop at University Avenue. I can smell it, see it right this minute. An old man Hess with his little bitty glasses. He ran a shoe shop and this shoe repair shop and a bicycle shop in one building. And I had a bike and it had V handlebars. Oh, I wanted that bike so much. And my dad, I'll see what we can do. And on the way home, my grandpa said, "Don't worry, Johnny, we're going to get that bike." And I don't know where he didn't have any money. He was a real terrible tradesman. He somehow
saw the necessity,
somehow or another I ended up with that bike, and that was one of the great joys of my life, that bicycle. And my grandfather. My grandfather was very important to me. He was a great storyteller.
He had time to pay attention
He
to you.
paid a lot of attention to me in his own way.
And he listened to you, probably.
And he listened, and we gardened. He worked. He helped my grandmother plant things in the garden, and again, not his wife.
Did he play any card games with you?
The cards came later in my life, and that was my mother's interest in bridge. We never played cards. We had I can't remember, I've seen them. They're kind they shot things in the holes in the corners.
Carom.
Carom.
Yeah,
we had one of those.
We had those.
We had those.
Yeah.
But we didn't play cards as
Well, did you play things like parcheesi and checkers and
checkers?
Grandfathers are sometimes good at that.
He was very good. My grandfather was a marvelous whittler.
Oh.
He could whittle things. He could take he and my great uncle Billy Thompson could they'd go down to the park and get a willow stick, a live willow, and they'd take it on and whittle a chain out of it. It was incredible. Watch those two little guys. My Uncle Billy Thompson was the last surviving member who was a veteran of the wall between the states. My Grandpa John, signed up, but they found out he was only 15, and they wouldn't let. And he worked on the trains. He worked as a flagman on the trains that took troops from the north down to the south. For a few years, he worked on the Burlington.
I was going to ask you if you had a Victrola at home. You didn't. Your sisters didn't get to dance around the house.
They danced. They were very lively. My Merle was a Badger Beauty. And,
was she?
Was very active. Evelyn was the. I shouldn't say. She was a very bright girl. She was the grind of the family. She was a straight A type. I remember once she got a B and almost finished her.
Well, did they bring their friends home? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Did you have a piano?
Yeah.
Oh,
and
so
Evelyn and Merle played it, and I took lessons.
So there was a lot of singing and that sort of thing.
And I remember they had whistles. The boys would. Oh, we also had two roomers a lot of the time. One or two. Al Rand was with us for several years. A very brilliant young man. And
did they eat with you?
Oh yeah.
So it was a boarder too.
And Margaret Johnson. God, I'd forgotten about Margaret.
Margaret
Johnson, who was in the Department of Vocational Education, and she was a dietitian and traveled all over this. She was only with us on weekends.
Oh.
But she lived with us for years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where we all slept. I can't quite remember that. We only had 4 regular bedrooms and then another room that could be sort of made into a bedroom, and then plus this great, huge, wonderful space in the attic.
You didn't get to be up in the attic, though. You had your own room.
I had my own room until my grandfather became ill, and then
I
banished.
see.
I think I probably stayed.
Well, people did double up a lot in those
We had
days,
to.
and
We had to.
having roomers was a very common way
It
of
was a
earning
very
money.
common way, and but Al Rand was a great guy, and Ed Banner was another one. I remember these funny. I haven't thought of these names for years, but they were good. Al Rand was a gymnast of some repute. I believe he was a Big Ten champion gymnast, and he was marvelous.
Did he stay with you while he was in school?
Oh yeah, probably 2 or 3 years. And
so summers he would have been gone.
Summers he would be back.
Mm-hmm.
He was of the Ingersoll Rand family that made machinery, pneumatic drill machinery type thing. Very bright guy, wonderful, wonderful man. But I'll never forget one time he said, John, get your mother out here. I said, I want to show her something. And so I went and got Mom. Al wants to show you something. And he climbed a telephone pole over here, and then there was a telephone pole over here. And he went hand over hand on one of those big telephone cables. And I thought my mother was going to have a stroke.
Oh, gosh. Oh.
But,
well, I imagine you enjoyed having a big fellow in the house.
I don't remember them particularly. I do too. I remember one thing. I remember I lost Santa Claus. I was a great believer in Santa Claus. We were then living on Madison Street. I'd forgotten about Madison Street. That was just we were waiting for the deal on Adams Street to be closed.
Oh.
We rented a house temporarily on Madison Street next to the McGowans, which is where Merle and Murray met.
Mm-hmm.
And Santa Claus was going to bring me a new flexible fire.
A sled, in case somebody doesn't know that.
A sled, yeah. Well, anybody doesn't know a flexible fire shouldn't be listening to this. And Santa Claus sent it down the hill. And everybody said, oh, look at Santa, see Santa. And I was looking for Santa, looking at a dumb kid, looking at the flexible fire hit me right here, and pretty near broke my legs. It was just, did it hurt. And Al Rand came tearing out from behind the garage where he'd slipped down the flexible fire. And I said, Santa Claus. So that was the end of Santa Claus.
But that was a wonderful sled to have.
Oh, boy, I still have it. No, Andrew's got it now.
Oh, good.
He had it until just recently. I love that sled.
Yeah, good quality.
They were great sleds.
But you didn't have many hills around there.
Oh,
in
my
that
dear.
area, did you?
Oh, Marie, we had the most gorgeous hills in the world. We
Where
had
did you
Lincoln
go?
Street and Edgewood Avenue.
Oh, that's right.
Lincoln
Edgewood.
Street,
Yeah.
the city of Madison closed Lincoln Street for us.
Oh.
And the neighbors were so wonderful about it, I can't get over it. I remember Jerry Simon, he had to park his car outside because he couldn't get into his own garage because Lincoln Street was closed.
I see.
And then the Cantwells and Father Bloodgood, all those people, and we get on Jefferson Street. That's Jefferson, Adams, Vilas, across the road in the parking. We could clear down to the lagoon on our sled. And we iced those things.
Did you?
Yeah. And, oh, did we slide. And then finally the city took that away from us, and we moved to Edgewood. That was the
That Edgewood would be a really
was
steep
beautiful.
hill,
And there, Leo Crowley had built his beautiful home there. And Leo, I suppose my dad and Bud Jackson and the others said, how about we do it? He said, fine. Every kid should have a sliding hill. I'll park my car someplace else. And he did. And Leo lived there with 2.
So you could go from Edgewood down
Clear down onto Lake Lake.
Yeah, onto the lake.
Clear way down on the lake. They had wonderful.
Gee, you never break any teeth?
All came within an ace of getting killed once. I hit Dave Leiser. He was going one way and I was going another. We collided, and I don't know why one of us wasn't killed. We were both some terrible cuts and some
Pretty
awful bruises.
resilient. Uh-huh.
And Dave had a badly broken arm as a
Uh-huh.
result of that.
So you belly flopped, I
Oh,
suppose.
yeah. It was a wonderful place for kids. Where we were many, lots of kids.
Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful situation with all those boys. I suppose there were some girls in the neighborhood,
Sure.
but you didn't pay much attention to them.
No, I was very fond of them. I was very fond of the Jackson sisters. They were married. Mary and Miriam, the most beautiful things I ever saw in my whole life. Then next door were the McCoy girls, and they were nice. I don't know why I'm talking too much. I think.
Oh, absolutely not. This is really interesting. I was wondering if you walked to school with the boys
Both we walked together.
in grade school. In high
Oh, yeah,
school, you
yeah.
probably got sort of interested
We
in
got
some girls.
interested in girls. I don't recall being too uptight about girls until toward high school. I do remember I remember going to parties. Dorothy Dennis always had parties. And Rebecca Clark always had parties.
What kind of parties?
Costume party type things, and I remember being very embarrassed. For the fact-
Halloween? No.
I don't really remember. I do remember that some of the kids would come with rented costumes, and I was very uptight about that because I never could come up with it. I'd have to.
You'd have to be a tramp or something.
Well, no, I remember I once came as Lindbergh,
Oh.
but I was just using my leather cap and so on.
Sounds pretty good.
I can remember the girls, Janet Nelson. She was the prettiest girl in the world. And we all stood around her yard waiting for her to show.
Scraping your feet on the
Yeah.
sidewalk.
But that didn't come until high school. In
Mhm.
high school, I was absolutely madly in love with Elizabeth Ann O'Malley, Mrs. Wallace Chickering.
Oh.
And Dixie Davis was another dear, beloved friend.
When they had these parties at their homes, this was obviously boy-girl parties.
Boy-girl.
And what did you do?
They were usually pretty well organized, and of course there was always somebody in attendance. We didn't.
Oh, you didn't. Were they dancing parties, or
No,
did you play
no, I would
games?
say
or
game parties.
You
as
played
opposed to
games,
dancing parties.
charades.
Although at
and-
Dennison's, I remember at Dennison's, Mrs. Dennison used to arrange music.
Oh.
And we would dance, and I think we did some round dances and square dances. And they were quite organized, and then we always knew it was time to go home because she would play
Good night, ladies.
Good Night Ladies.
Mhm.
But Mrs. Cockafair, she was a teacher for many years in West. Her daughter, Mary Louise, she had parties. I never had one. My mother couldn't.
Mhm.
I don't think she could.
Well, I think the girls are more apt to have them anyway.
And I don't.
You didn't go to dancing school.
Oh Lord, no. I would.
There were a few young boys who did.
No,
I heard.
we did.
Went to Leo Kale's. And,
Not of my friends. I
Uh-huh.
knew no one who. We would have ostracized him. Something terrible.
Yeah.
No, we were pretty.
Were there high
Macho.
school parties? There were proms.
Not
and,
so much. There were after-school dances, and then of course, Tri-High. Remember, there were high school sororities,
Oh.
and one of my early tragedies was that by then I was going with Barbara. Barbara didn't get invited. She was blackballed by Tri-High. Couldn't get in. And this was a pretty long weekend for us because we used to love to go to those parties.
Oh, that's a blow.
But we didn't. Barb, I was not a good dancer. Again, it sort of ties in with this inability as an athlete. I was always a kind of a hanger-oner at parties. I wasn't good at that.
But you were a good conversationalist.
We taught, and we did a lot of things. Like we played lots of games, and we played all these games like guess who I am kind of game.
Charades.
Charades, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Was good at that.
Mm-hmm.
But we were very active. Now in high school, we were involved in plays. We were involved in athletics. Barbara and I were in plays together.
You didn't sing?
Oh, sure. We were both alto. She was a triple trio, and we were both an a cappella choir.
Well, see, you were pretty
Oh,
busy.
we were very active, and a little bit in athletics.
Did you have any church parties?
Church was not really a very important part of my life, to tell you the
uh-huh.
truth. The only reason I went to church in later years was because we had a good gym, and we played basketball, and we played those terrible Baptists across the street, and we could whip the Baptists pretty easily.
Well, our Presbyterian church had quite an active youth society. I've forgotten the name of it.
Endeavor Society.
Endeavor, Christian Endeavor.
Sure. Well, I was a member of that, but it didn't.
And they even went to summer camps.
No, we didn't do
sometimes.
that.
I
no.
didn't do that.
I went to what is, let's see, Westminster Church. It's now it's the one on West Lawn Avenue, the pretty little church on West Lawn. I went to summer Sunday school a couple of 3 summers.
Bible school.
Bible school.
Yeah.
And of course, I always liked the Bible. But instead of having the evening prayer where everybody sat around and held hands, my grandfather usually read from the Bible, and when he didn't, my dad did. And then
This is Sundays?
Every day, every night.
Oh, every evening.
Every night.
Uh-huh.
Somebody read a passage from the Bible. Short one before dinner and a long one after.
Did you have any restrictions as to what you could do on Sundays?
You were to be a little gentleman, but no, I was not restricted. No, we could do pretty much.
Would you always pretty much
But
always
not
went-
at home. You were to be quiet at home, to be practice the piano and that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But
Did you go to church with your family usually?
I went to Sunday school.
You went to Sunday school and
they
then came
went to
home.
church.
You didn't have to stay with them.
No, I went down as a little fellow. I suppose I went to church with them. No, Sunday school. There was a big bunch of us. See, all the big churches were downtown, and as a group, as a neighborhood group, we would go.
It was the customary thing for
And we
almost,
went on the streetcar.
almost any
And,
family.
We even I can remember the streetcar driver was a guy named Court Conley that we came home with, and I knew him because my sister knew his sisters, and he was going to university, and he was a part-time streetcar driver.
Oh.
And we'd come in along West Lawn. Not West Lawn, East Terrace. Those are those 4-wheel cars. You probably never seen them. Madison streetcars were very short, and they only had 4 wheels. They didn't have double truck wheels. They were short, and the wheels were pretty close together. And if you could get about 20 kids in the back of a car, you could bounce it. And if you really worked at it, you could bounce it off the track. And we would try. We never succeeded, but some kids did.
Oh.
Oh, geez, and I can remember soaping the rails. They put on the brakes and the streetcar kept on going.
There must not have been too much traffic then. You didn't have to worry about
Marie,
that.
I can remember, and that this is, I know I'm wrong, but I'm not. I can remember walking home from the Strand and walking down State Street and balancing on the street, walking on the streetcar rails. And I can remember somebody saying, "Here comes a streetcar, so get off." There was so little traffic.
Oh,
I remember in 1932, 30, 31, and 32, they ripped up State Street and rebuilt it completely. Took out the streetcar tracks and stuff and paved it. And it was a long, terrible process. And I remember it so well because I was working at Brown's at that time. Brown
That's it.
in
And
high school.
those granite blocks were between
Yeah, well, there
the
were some of
streetcars.
those, and some not. But toward uptown, there were blocks, and they were all ripped up. And it was a long process. And then the sewer system was completely and totally inadequate.
Oh.
And they had to do the whole thing over again. And that was when this was all hand dug, and I can remember these men, the Italians that worked at this stuff. This is beside the point. John Icky was the contractor Tom.
Icky?
George Ickey's father.
Yeah.
John.
Mm-hmm. I-C-K-E.
Yeah. And do you know why there's so many Italian kids named John, Philip, and George?
No.
Because of the Ickey family.
Is that right?
Those are the three brothers, and the Ickeys went to Italy and to Sicily, and wrote contracts with Italian and Sicilian men to bring them to America, and they provided housing for
To bring them to Madison.
To bring them to
specifically.
Madison.
Oh.
To work as ditch diggers and.
Oh, I had no idea.
Oh, yes, and they were. That's why we had such a fine Italian community here. It was the Ickeys
Now,
went over to Italy and brought them here.
That Italian community was not too far from you,
No,
was it?
Wasn't
it in the Vilas area?
Sure. It was,
So didn't those kids go to high school with you?
Yes. Well, most of them went to Central, although many of them were very close friends of mine. See, Tony Canepa, this is through camp. The Intravias, Tony Canepa. I knew many Italian families.
They weren't ostracized in any way?
Oh,
or,
in no way at all.
The kids, I suppose, learned to speak English right away, and
Well, most of them were American born. Their parents didn't speak English often. I went into many Italian homes where Papa and Mama couldn't speak English. Particularly Grandpa couldn't speak English. No, these people were friends of mine, and Jewish. See, people forget today, in 1985, that Madison was very, very integrated in 1920 up to about 1930. The Irish lived here. Irish lived in the Fourth Ward. The Italians, Jews, and the blacks lived.
You're saying they were segregated?
Absolutely.
Then. Yeah.
And it was a fact of life. My mother was pretty shocked with the fact that I used to go to the Canepas.
How's that spelled?
Canepa.
Oh.
Tony Canepa is still in. My close good friend was Chris Canepa, and he was a great athlete and a marvelous tumbler. And he was tumbling one day in Birmingham Park in a kind of a show, and he slipped or something. He fell, he broke his neck and died. That was one of the.
Well, your mother probably would have preferred that you didn't.
She
go
didn't
with
care
that type.
for me to be messing with the Italians and the blacks. I had two good black friends.
Oh, did?
Alex London was a good friend of mine. Kay Coleman was one of my closest friends. I remember. Again, this is hard for me to. But I'm sure I'm right. When we moved to Menlo Park, I'm going to say 1922 at the latest, there was one Jewish family in the whole of Menlo Park, and they were the Helpets. They lived on Grant and Jefferson. And slowly but surely more Jewish families came, first the Semichos and so on. And I remember when the Franks, that's Sal Frank, who was president of Frank Fruit Company, wonderful, wonderful people. They bought a lot across the street from my house. And I remember my father going over and talking to him, and Sal, my dad told us later, he said, Sal said, do you think that people in the neighborhood will accept us? And Sal said, of course they will. Don't worry about it at all. We have many good Jewish neighborhoods. My father was he had many black friends in Madison.
So he was a very liberal thinker.
He was a very liberal, in the most broad sense of the word.
Was the Triangle area there then?
Oh, absolutely.
But that was a little different class than the Winger Park Italians, wasn't it?
Oh no, the Italians all lived in the Triangle.
Oh,
they all
did?
lived. Yeah, they all lived on the other side of Park Street.
Oh,
yeah,
I
sure.
was thinking you were on this
Oh
side.
no, they were on the other side of
So
Park
they
Street.
did live in the Triangle.
Oh,
so they would
absolutely.
have gone to Central then.
No, but some of them went.
How did you meet them then?
Through the Y, through camp.
I see.
Tony Canepa was one of my first good friends. The parish is Parisi, actually. Many of these were people that through basketball games, football games.
through
this kind of
through
stuff.
sports and different kinds.
And mostly through the Y.
Skating,
Y
I
was a
suppose,
very
yeah.
important part of our
Uh-huh.
lives.
Uh-huh.
And we all participated in that. They were all there.
Were you quite a student?
No, I was a poor student. I always got by, but...
You weren't of the bookish type.
Oh, no, I'll say I wasn't.
Mhm.
I never really applied myself ever in high school or college, which is too bad because I should have, but I didn't.
Well, you were having a
I
good time doing a lot of other
I was
things.
getting by and wasn't in any trouble. So
Mhm. And if you had time for all these other activities like sports and plays and things.
I want to go back to the Franks. The Franks built this very nice home. It was right across the street from our house. And when they moved in, my mother had I won't say a tea because they didn't have teas in those days, but she invited the neighborhood women to come and meet Mrs. Frank. And 3 women didn't show. And my mother, one of them, was a close neighbor friend. I don't mean a lifelong friend, but a close neighbor friend.
Yes.
My mother never spoke to that woman again.
She
as
didn't
long as
speak to her?
Never.
Oh.
She never forgave her for the fact that she didn't come to meet Mrs. Frank when she knew she was home. She knew she was there, and she never.
She had just decided not to.
She wasn't going to come and meet any of those Jewish folk.
Mm.
So there was a lot of that. There was a lot of prejudice
absolutely.
and a lot of segregation, and
Oh, yeah.
I remember my
And
father.
there was a lot against the Catholics in those days, too.
We had, I believe, this was never discussed. My family never talked much about religion, and they never talked about sex. Anything between your knees and your neck was never, ever brought up. It was just shameful, I thought. But
Well,
that was the way it was.
it was a kind of reserve that was not that they ignored it. It just wasn't polite.
It wasn't done. I really believe, that looking back and thinking of how long they waited before they got this house in Windsor Park, I think they were having trouble getting a house because people thought they were Irish Catholics. I think this.
Oh, really?
See, Shaw is Irish, and Andrew McCoy, who was our next door neighbor, he had a terrible time getting a house there because he was Catholic. But that, in my lifetime, I remember clearly a very terrible prejudice against Jews. I remember Kay Cohn, his father, ran an apparel store on West Washington Avenue down in the bush, strictly working man's store. And he used to talk about the terrible prejudice and how it was awful to be a Jew.
Well, there were very few of them in Madison, I guess.
Not too many.
And
But I remember some beautiful things. McCoy's girls were sister. We always called her Sister Agnes. She should have been a nun. She was very Catholic. She used to run schools. Our houses had 6 steps. And the 6 steps were the grades.
Sure.
And if you got promoted, Sister Agnes would promote you.
you could answer the right question.
Sal Frank came home early one afternoon, and he looked over at his son. One of the boys was crying. I don't know whether it was Allie or which one, but one of his younger sons was crying. And he came home, see what's the trouble? He said, Sister Agnes won't promote me. What's the matter? He said, I can't remember the Stations of the Cross. Well, Sal almost had hysterics. Well, what the nice part of the story was that Christmas, Sal invited all of the neighborhood children over. He brought home some special fruit and candy from the store. You know, they owned Frank Brothers grocery store. He had nuts and candy. It was a real. And he explained the Festival of the Lights.
Oh, how nice.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. And I saw Sal just before he died. He just died a few years ago. And we were talking about the old days in Lincoln Park. And he says, John, you remember the time we talked about the Hanukkah in the house? You remember that? I said, I sure do. I'll never forget.
Oh, isn't that
So,
great?
but that's...
Well, I suppose that at high school you knew a lot of university professor's children.
Oh, sure.
They lived on the west
Well,
side
they lived on the
primarily.
west side.
Yeah.
There were many of them lived in Winkley Park. George Wagner, the neighbors, were part of the zoo. Bob, your husband, had a terrible problem with Bob. Bob had a problem with George Wagner.
Well, I'm not surprised.
Well, no. Bob came here. Hasn't he told you this?
I don't
He
remember.
came here to register, and he came to George Wagner, who was in the zoo department.
Oh, was it Wagner? Oh,
George Wagner,
yeah,
sure.
I know
And
the
he
story
said,
very
sure.
well.
And he said, I want to do this and that and the other. And George looked at him and said, you belong out in the egg school.
Yeah.
You know, and Bob never forgave him for that. I told Bob, George trapped banded birds by traps. And his house was not directly behind us, but kitty corner of our house. And I didn't like that. I didn't like those birds in those cages. So I'd get up early.
In the traps, you mean?
In the traps. Real early, and I'd sneak over and let them out. And George finally caught me.
Oh.
And he was just furious. He was a very...
Did you think he was hurting the birds?
I don't know what I thought.
Oh,
I just thought that was terrible to trap birds.
Oh,
and so I went over.
Well, I wondered if you probably remember the names of some of your high school teachers.
Oh, well, a few. Margaret O'Neill was my homeroom teacher in Madison West. And Barbara would remember them better than I. We all had the same teachers. Bob Hurd was our gym teacher.
Who was the principal?
Volney G. Barnes.
He was there a long time, wasn't he?
Too long.
Yes.
Christie, I was very fond of Christopherson. He was my man. He was a man. I took math courses from Christie. Volney G. I didn't care for at all. And he kicked me out of school.
Oh.
And very unjustified. My father, today, of course, my father would have sued him. But I took printing. I liked printing. I took a lot of shop courses because I enjoyed them. And I took printing, and one of the things I was assigned to do was to print the activity tickets, football tickets. And a group of them, they were numbered and so on, and the group showed up missing. And it was my fault because I did this. I was responsible.
Oh.
And Volney Barnes didn't give me a hearing or a damn thing. He said, until those tickets show up, you're out. Just like that. And that's the kind of a man he was. He was a real stinker. And I didn't know what to do. So I went home. I told my dad. And he said, did you steal it? And I said, I certainly did not. You know that. And he said, well, let's wait a day or so. I said, well, what will I do? He said, do nothing. He said, if you try to find out. So I got some of my pals looking around. We found nothing. And finally, after about the third day, or I'd say the second or third day, Pa said, have you heard anything from Barnes? I said, no. He says, we're going to go see him. And he did. And he was pretty short and to the point. And he said, the way you've treated this boy is entirely wrong. Put him back in school, or I will take it up with the Department of Public Instruction where I work. And I got back in, and about not too long later, Lloyd Benson, who was my teacher, there's a name I remember real. He found out who took it. And Volney made a very, I think I still got the letter that he wrote apologizing to my dad, not to me, to my father for it. But Volney was...
Some kid had taken them?
Yeah, they were stolen by one of the kids taking the picture.
Oh.
And Lloyd Benson caught him.
Hmm.
But teachers, I remember teachers in Randall School, Miss Stens and Miss Hendrickson. Oh, Lita Wilson in Madison West High School. I remember her very well. She was my Latin teacher.
Oh, I thought she taught at Central.
She did, but she retired.
I see. Okay, because I've heard her name.
Oh yeah, she was a wonderful teacher.
Oh yeah. Well, who were some of the others of your grade school teachers? I forgot to ask if you mentioned those.
Grade school, Miss Teasdale, Miss Stens, Miss Fossbinder,
Who was
Gwendolyn Gaynor Jones, my English teacher. I loved her. She was marvelous.
Who was the principal at Randall? Do you remember that?
At Randall School was Florence Dodge.
Oh.
Wonderful woman. good. She was a great teacher. She never should have been a principal. She should have been a teacher.
Oh.
She should have stayed a teacher.
She wasn't a sixth grade teacher, too?
She may have been. I don't
Mhm.
recall. I believe. See, when I went to Randall School, I went through the 9th grade.
Through the
You know,
ninth
through the
grade?
9th grade. Yeah.
Oh, I thought they never
Oh,
went
no,
through.
no, they did.
More than 8.
No,
Oh.
9th grade.
Uh-huh.
Well, that was because West wasn't quite finished. See, we
Yeah,
were
I was
first.
going to ask you if
We were the
West
first
wasn't new.
students to go. Our class was the first class to go into West High School. We went in before Ed Wilkie's class was before ours. They went in the fall, and we went in February.
What year?
Well, we graduated in 1934, so work that out. That would have been 1930.
Mm-hmm. So that was pretty wonderful, this new,
We brand
big-
new, and
big
oh,
building.
were we impressed, and was it beautiful.
Big gym.
And we were happy that we didn't have to go to Central,
Mhm.
because that was a pretty tired old school by then.
Mm-hmm.
But they kept us an extra semester at Randall. I don't know how they did it.
Oh, uh-huh.
Giselle, Florence Giselle. She used to let me drive her car. Ethel Snyder Wanslow, gymnastics. Ray Holcomb. I think the names are coming back.
Oh,
I forgot.
yeah.
My grandmother. I was in many plays at West. I think 5 or 6.
Oh.
And I loved it. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Oh, there's nothing more exciting, I think.
And I was on stage crews or in
Uh-huh.
every play. That
And
was
who
in
directed the plays?
Ray Holcomb
Oh.
and Ethel Wanslow. And my first one was Rachel Eubank.
Oh, is that right?
Rachel
Uh-huh.
Bell Eubank. I loved her.
What were the plays? Do you remember any of them?
The Swan, Merton of the movies.
Were you Merton?
No, I was the director.
Oh.
I was the director because I knew where I could borrow a pair of director's boots from
I
Gary
see.
Callahan. Swan, Merton of the movies. I was in quite a few, but I
They weren't terribly serious ones, then, I take it.
Miss Lulabette,
Oh.
Pirates of Penzance.
Oh, that's a
A
good one.
little bit typical, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Some operettas, too, then.
One or two. I
sang.
usually I never had a lead. I never had a singing lead.
Mhm.
Didn't have a strong enough voice. But I had smaller parts.
Mhm.
But Marie, those were marvelous days. You know, you didn't have to lock your door. Our house on Adams Street was you entered in a great big hall, and it was sort of separate.
Mhm.
Sliding doors that went into the living room.
Oh, yes.
A big door that went into the great huge kitchen, a great big pantry, a great big back hall, a great big porch out the back, and a great big dining room. The key to that house was always in that little hall window.
Oh.
You know, never, or the house was unlocked.
Yeah, Madison was a pretty small city, really, in those days.
30 to 40.
Mm-hmm.
But it was such a interesting, pleasant life in some ways. I'm thinking of police at Randall School, the crossing guard. We had crossing guards in those days. His name was Bill Panini. He was a policeman, city policeman. And he came and helped us across the street at noon, and he came at night. And I remember we were doing something naughty. I don't know what we were doing. I can't remember. On the bridge. What is the street that goes up across the bridge at Randall School? We were doing something. Spooner Street.
Mhm.
Spooner. We were doing something we weren't supposed to do. And Bill Kenny came up and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Hold out your hand." And he belted me with that club.
With a club?
Yeah, Miss Billy's club.
Uh-huh.
Don't ever do that again. You know, and boy, yes, no sir, we were afraid.
Yeah, right.
I don't mean
There
he
was
hurt me,
there
but
was
he
authority, yeah,
he
in those
let
days.
me know that he wasn't going to put up with any nonsense.
Oh, and then summers you said you went back up to your grandmother's
Well,
to visit.
we did two things. We went first to Pierce County when I took my grandma home.
Mhm.
Went to the teachers that knew, or whoever lived there in the weird time. And then my mother and I went across the state to Door County.
And did you drive?
No, we went on the train.
On the train.
Well, we drove up because we had to haul Grandma and all her
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
And my dad would come back home, and we'd go across. My mother and I would go across to Door County, where she stayed in Ephraim every summer. She had terrible hay fever.
Oh, she did?
Yeah, and she stayed there every summer for years.
And did you stay?
Yeah, until I
Was this in a boarding house or what?
No, we had a cottage. The same
Oh, you
year.
had a
the same
cottage?
yeah, every year.
Oh.
And,
Were there other people you knew there who had cottages?
oh, we knew a fair number of people. I don't remember.
I just wonder how you happened to get a cottage then.
Well, they took Mother all kinds of places so she could have some relief in the summertime. And Door County turned out to be the place.
I
I
see.
remember we went to Trout Lake, one summer we went to Crandon, and she still had these, and what was interesting, what's fascinating, what they finally learned, she was allergic to horse dander. Wasn't hay fever at all.
Oh.
And there weren't very many horses in Pierce County in Door County for some reason. That's why she was better there. But once they found out what it was, she had some shots in it.
Oh.
But just think, she was raised by a horse breeder.
Yes, she
Poor
must have
child. She had
gotten
a terrible time.
developed that if she hadn't
Yeah,
had
she
it.
a terrible time.
Oh, I see. Well, I didn't realize that you'd been up there.
Oh,
that long.
every summer.
And you owned that cottage?
Oh no, my father would never. My father was very.
You just rented it for the summer.
We rented the same cottage. It was are you familiar with Ephraim? I don't know.
Well, I've been there.
It's now it's the little bookshop in Ephraim, right off on Main Street.
Oh.
We were in that cottage every summer for.
So was that right on the water?
No,
I
back
didn't think so.
a couple blocks from the
Uh-huh.
water. But I had the free run of the town, and I loved Ephraim.
Did you like being there, or would you rather be
No, I'd
home
much
with your
rather
friends?
I'd rather stay here or in Ellsworth.
Uh-huh.
I had many good friends in Ellsworth where I stayed in the
Oh,
summertime
uh-huh.
many times. I loved Ellsworth. That was a great place. It was a great town.
But I would think it would have been hard to leave all those.
Well, this
friends
is when
from here.
this is when I was a
I
little
see.
boy. Then.
Uh-huh.
I was probably the first time we went to Ephraim. Was probably either 4 or 5.
Oh,
I was just a little boy. I have pictures. My mother's pictures have disappeared off the face of the earth. I don't know what happened to them. It's one of the moves. I bitterly regret it because we had some wonderful Door County pictures that I'd love to have today.
Well, maybe they'll turn out someplace.
See, now, speaking of who we knew in Door County, one of the families we knew in Door County were the Tresslers. And that's Ben Olson's establishment today.
Oh.
We knew Grandma. I can remember going to Grandma Tressler's. When I was just a little baby boy. It was long before Ben ever put into the scene. I don't remember Alice at all. Oh, God, I can remember. I remember going there. I thought we got it. This was in either.
Used to be moving on. Yeah, all right. This is Marie McCabe interviewing John Shaw with the second part of his interview on February 20th, 1985. We'll continue. I think we left off where you and Barbara were still in high school and were about to graduate. And I wonder what you did after that, after your graduation that summer.
Well, we graduated in February.
Oh, yes.
We were the last class, and we both went to Madison area, what is now Madison Area Technical College. We went to theater for 1 semester, just to fill in our time. We couldn't get a job, although I was, at the time, all through the last 2 years in high school, I had worked part-time at Brown's Bookshop, weekends and sometimes after school, which was very fortunate for me. Mr. Emery, the owner of Brown's, lived just across the street from us.
What was his full name?
Lyndon King Emery.
E-M-E-R-Y?
E-M-O-R-Y. You know Ruth Allen?
Mm-hmm.
Ruth, Dr. Robin Allen. She's the only one left. She's his baby daughter, Ruth.
Oh.
Ruth was Lyndon King Emery's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
He was a great man, great old guy. Mathematical genius. He could do any figuring that I could ever come up with and do it in his head, just bang. Incredible man.
And he ran Brown's
He
bookstore.
owned and operated Brown's Bookshop for
Was
many
it-
years.
Was the co-op there at
Yes,
that
ma'am.
time?
Sure, always.
Co-op started in 1892.
Oh, it did.
And Brown started in 1911. But Mr. Emmy came there in 1919 or 20, somewhere around there, and bought it as a sole proprietor.
Were they about the same size at that time?
No, Co-op was bigger, and then as time went on, the Co-op became more of a department store, and by 1933, the Co-op, the old Co-op, went bankrupt, and Brown's kept on going, and then I worked at Brown's for a good many years on a full-time basis. We were then, the roles were exactly reversed of what they are today. Brown's was the big store, and the Co-op was
That was my impression.
incidentally a bookstore, but they were a gift shop and a women's department and a men's department and so on. Sporting goods and office supplies, everything but textbooks. But anyway.
So in the fall that year, you went,
I went to
the
university
with most of your friends?
Yeah, everybody. We all, most of our friends stayed here. Very few of our friends went away to school.
And you lived at home the whole time?
Home. Barbara lived at home and I lived at home.
And what were you planning to major in?
Education. There was no question about that in my mind. I planned to be a teacher, and then I hoped to get into high school administration, which my father had done much of his life. And that's what I wanted to do, and there wasn't any question about it. But I got waylaid and got off into all kinds of strange areas. But,
when was it you started the university? You graduated from high school in...
I think, Marie, I don't know, but I think in January of 1933, we started the university in the fall of 1934, so we were in the class. But Barbara says we were in the class of 37, so maybe it was a year earlier. I can't remember. I don't know. I have never looked it up.
So this was Depression time.
You bet.
And what was the tuition? Do you remember?
My tuition was the first year was $21.50. When it went to $27.50, it was a minor disaster.
A catastrophe.
But very inexpensive to go to school.
So you couldn't afford not to go.
Well, if you in the community in which I lived and the friends I had, everybody went to university. It was very unusual to go in.
And that was the kind of job you wanted to get when you
Well,
were
it was what I always assumed that I was going to do.
So what was it like in the Depression days? Was everybody poor, or were there some pretty flashy people?
No, there were very few flashy types. I don't remember anybody. I had no friends who had money. I knew everybody that I knew worked or had to work. I had one Bobby Shaw, a 55th cousin, a shirt-tail relation from Milwaukee. His grandfather had money, and he was a fraternity brother and a guy I knew pretty well. He had some money. Gene Gedgen was another man who had some money involved. These are all fraternity brothers. But they were the only ones. All the rest of us struggled. I remember...
You had enough to join the fraternity, though.
My grandmother gave me enough money to pay my initiation fee. My grandma also. And I'm sure it hurt her, but she knew I wanted to join, and so she gave me that money.
Did you spend a lot of time at the fraternity?
No, I didn't, because I lived at home. I used it as a job. I stayed there over the holidays and kept the furnace going, and I got paid for that. I got some of my dues or some. And for a little while, I worked in the kitchen for my room and board, so that I could eat lunches down there, sometimes dinner. I had all kinds of jobs. I worked as a cab driver. I worked at Brown's. My best job while I was in school, my sophomore year, I had the great good fortune of taking a course under Harry Harlow, and he knew my financial difficulty, and I was a fairly good student. Harry liked me, and he got me a job, an NYA job, in the monkey lab, which I had for almost 2 years.
He was a psychologist.
Yeah. And he later became world famous for his experiments with baby monkeys and their mothers and the absence of their mothers.
The primate lab.
And my job in the primate lab was an NYA job for which I received from the federal government $30 a month. But my job was to feed the monkeys in the morning and feed the monkeys in the evening. I didn't have to clean cages. I didn't have to do anything special. Problem, I had to work 7 days a week, and I never could be late. And I had to have a substitute who was approved by Harlan. So that my problem was consistency,
Mhm.
be there every day.
Mhm.
But I worked only about an hour a day, so I made $1 a day for 1 hour's work.
Mhm.
And that made me rich.
That's pretty good.
Because
Mhm.
I had friends, Dick Nelson, I remember, worked in the library. He never liked it. Russ Perry, I don't remember what Russell was. He had a job where he worked about 4 hours a day to get the same $1 a day that I got. For
Yeah,
an
I
hour a day.
remember 25 cents an hour.
It
about
was
it.
very unfair system.
Mhm.
But Harry kept me in that job for a long time. I worked at Brown's. I started in Brown's in high school. My sister, Merle, worked there. She was the trade book buyer at Brown's for many years before
Oh.
I came there.
And what did you do there?
The first job was cleaning books. In those days, you erased books. You never sold a book with any crib notes in it. They had to be erased, or you couldn't sell them. That was the rule of the university
Mhm.
back in the days when rules were enforced. If you had a cribbed language book, they took it away from you and made it stick.
Mhm.
So I cleaned textbooks. We had a machine that cleaned the edges of the textbooks so they looked nice and pristine and clean. And then gradually I got up, so I was working on the floor. I was a stock clerk for a while, and I became, worked in the supply department. And ultimately, and after working there 5 years, I became manager of the textbook department, which was the big job,
Mhm. Yes.
the important job of the store.
Did
And I
that
worked-
mean you ordered books?
Yeah, I managed the textbook department,
Mhm.
ordered the books and stocked them and took care of them.
Hmm.
I left in 1939 because his son, Alan, and I didn't get along very well. I was very aggressive in what I was doing, and so was Alan, and we locked horns along the way. And Lyndon King said, "It just seems to me it would be better for all of us if you went your merry way." So I did. And I left and ended up at Berkeley in the California Book Company, which is a long story.
Well, you went out to California, and you mentioned that you did not graduate, and this was because you were offered this job.
When I was in 38, and maybe it must have been 37. I must be wrong. I must be off a year or something. I was interviewing. Barbara got a job at Edgerton, and her salary was $1,040 a year.
And this was as an art teacher.
Art teacher, and art superintendent.
Oh.
Not teacher, superintendent. And I was looking for a job in the same area so we could be, sort of close to each other. And the only offer I had that was of any interest to me was one in Janesville, and I was offered about $1,200 to $1,300. And Mr. Emmy said if I would stay and work full time for 2 years, he would pay me double what I got offered if I'd start now. So I wasn't feeble-minded, so I started.
And that was just before you were to graduate.
Yeah, about I think it was my senior semester. I was always going to go back and get that degree, but I never did.
Mm-hmm. So then you left in about 39 and went out to California, where you expected to stay, you told me then.
Well, I had it in mind. I liked it very much. I didn't know where I was going. When I left, I bought a round-trip ticket on the Milwaukee Road for $65, which was round trip from Madison to Madison via any route that you wanted to go to the West Coast and back for $65.
That was Coach.
Coach, sure. I stopped in Missoula because I knew Peg Watrous' father was there, and I knew him, Dr. Modi, and I thought I'd go see him. I hadn't seen him for a long time. And I loved Missoula and that area, the mountains, and it's the big sky country, as we know today. And I said, can you help me? He was with the Anaconda Land Company. I said, can you help me? He says, no, I can't get you a job. But he said, I got a friend up in the mountains who needs help. Except he hasn't got any money. You'll get wonderful room and board and nothing else. But I was so intrigued. It sounded pretty good to me. And I had a little money, so I didn't have to have a lot of money. So I went to see the man. His name was George Larson. His wife's name was Elvina. And he was a baker who had gone bankrupt. And he started this little dude ranch, only it was for fishermen. Only his concept was, it was on Swan Lake in Big Fork, Montana. his concept was that fishermen ought to bring their families, their wives and their kids. So he had a lodge and 11 or 12 cabins, log cabins, beautiful place, on the lake, and the fishermen would come, bring their families. So they had this little dinky-doo dude ranch, horses and ponies and stuff, for the kids and for the wives. And this beautiful lodge where they served dinners.
Yeah, it must have been a treat.
And I had a wonderful time. I went to work on the 4th of July. My pay was room and board and a pack of cigarettes a day.
And all the sky you could drink in.
Yeah, you know, all the sky I could soak up. And I worked, in the morning I worked, he was digging a trench up the mountain to bring water down from a big spring that he had dammed up for fire protection. And the gravity coming down the hill would give it enough pressure to. And I worked on that in the morning, and then in the low mid-afternoon I came down from the mountain and went to work for Mrs. Larson in the kitchen, and I was a salad boy and the head weeder.
Uh-huh. So
Wonderful.
that lasted all summer, I suppose.
I stayed there until Christmas, just before Christmas.
Oh,
I stayed to help him finish the chore that he started, and because I was enjoying myself. And then I got back on my train and wandered around some more, and ended up in Berkeley. By that time, I'd used up most of my money, and I had to get a job. So I went just all the bookstores. There are 8 bookstores in Berkeley, as opposed to only 2 here. And I knew most of them because I had known of them when I was running the text department at Brown's. And I just went up the street. Started here, walked up Telegraph, and ended up there. And I wasn't having any luck. Nobody was hiring anybody, and nobody was interested. And I finally got up to the California Book Company, and there was a guy outside sweeping the walk and kind of cleaning up. And I asked him, I said, "You work here?" He said, "Yeah, I work here." And I said, "Do you think they might have an opening?" And I didn't have any idea. I said, "Well, this is a pretty good store, as I recall." I told him I'd been around, and I said, "We used to buy and sell a fair number of books back and forth here, used books." Yeah, I said, "I guess maybe you did." He said, "I don't know." He said, "I don't know anything about that." And I said, "Well, do you think, do you want to go in to go and see the boss?" He said, "Well, I don't know. You just go in and ask and see what you can do." I said, I wouldn't have any idea. I said, "Go in, and there's a little stairway back there. Go on upstairs and ask for the bookkeeper. Her name is Mrs. Zip. She'll see if she can get you in." So I went up and saw Mrs. Zip, and Dorothy Caroline Zip. And she looked at me kind of funny, but she said, "Well, I don't know, if you want to talk to him, you can. He's in his office." So I walked in. There, of course, was the guy that I'd been out talking to, who had been sweeping the sidewalk. Windy Daniels. He turned out to be the best friend in the book business I ever had. He was a wonderful man. I worked for him there at that store in Berkeley he had 3 stores in Berkeley, and I worked in 2 of them. And then that was at Christmas time, and then in the spring, he offered me a job managing a store in the San Jose, and so I took that job, and that was a very nice job. I liked it. I was there 2 years. And then I got drafted there. Uncle Sam came along and got me into my affairs. So I hadn't been home for quite a long time, and I thought, geez, I better get home before I do really get drafted. And came home then. And as it turned out, I didn't get drafted. I was deferred for a great variety of reasons, but I ended up working at A.O. Smith in Milwaukee during the war. And after the war, I came back, and as I told you, I started out. I came back to Brown's.
When did you get married in all this?
1942.
Oh,
And,
Barbara was still teaching at
she was still teaching, sure.
Mhm.
And
She was probably glad to have you come back.
you'll have to ask her. I don't know.
Well, you still had this attachment. I'm surprised you stayed away so long.
we were no more surprised. We were more surprised than a lot of people were, because I hadn't seen her for 2 years. We did communicate. We did talk. She had a gentleman friend, and I had a lady friend in California, a beautiful girl, Marjorie Suriel, and I was very fond. We kept communicating with each other.
But if the war hadn't come along, things might have turned out differently.
Could easily have been. I remember, I came back to Madison, and I arrived on Mother's Day. I don't know what day that is. That's in May, isn't it?
May, yeah,
Something.
second Sunday in May or something.
And my mother was pretty startled to see me, but because I hadn't seen her for a couple of years. Although one of the things I always did when I was away, I always wrote once a week.
Oh, good.
I don't know, I can't believe it, because I haven't written a letter since, I don't think. But I always wrote. I wrote to Barbara and I wrote to my mother. And
Only cost about 5 cents for the letter then.
I don't know, 3 cents, I think. I don't know. But I met Barbara rather in a strange fashion. I met her at a depot. I was meeting somebody else and they didn't show, and Barbara was there, and I said, well, let me take you home. Now, I got home in Madison, and I think it was Mother's Day or just before Mother's Day, and we were married on the 15th of June, so you see, it picked up awful fast.
Oh, yes.
She had, I don't know, it was a very, very strange proposal. I said, you know, we've been going out a little bit. I said, well, why don't we stop this monkey business and get married and stop all this? She kind of laughed. She said, well, maybe that's a good idea. She said, well, okay. She told her mother, and her mother was very happy about it, so was her dad. And I came home that night and told my mother, and I said, there's something that you might be interested in. I said, I proposed to Barbara tonight, and she accepted it. My mother's comment was, well, I'm glad you finally came to your senses.
They could see the writing on the wall.
That's enough of that.
So when you came back to Madison,
after a Milwaukee experience at A.O. Smith, we both worked at A.O. Smith. I worked
during
I worked
the war.
for the Navy. I was a Navy employee, but I worked at A.O. Smith in the torpedo division where they manufactured the torpedo shells.
Oh.
Very fascinating and very illuminating and a wonderful experience, but it's got nothing to do with State Street.
I think my brother worked there too, about that time.
It was a wonderful place. I enjoyed it very much. Just enough Navy, so I got a little flavor of how horrible the Navy was.
So then why did you quit there?
The war was over. It was all done.
Well, you stayed there at A.O.
Sure.
Smith
Yeah,
until the war was over.
I was there 3.5 years.
And you and Barbara lived there too then?
Oh, yeah, she worked. She lived there. We had an apartment on Capitol Drive. And she worked there too. I worked nights and she worked days. It was
She gave up her teaching.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't really hire married teachers.
There weren't no married teachers were verboten in those days.
That's right. You got married, you were out.
You were out in your ear. So. No, she worked in the tool department. She worked in the tool design department as a draftsman, and I worked in the machine shops.
And I expect they paid pretty good wages, didn't they?
I didn't make much. Barbara did really better than I did. Because I was a Navy employee, I got the difference between Navy pay and the average pay of the department.
Oh.
So if I didn't do too terribly well, but we got along. We had a nice little apartment, but we didn't do anything because, as I say, I worked nights and she worked days. It was a dumb life. It was really terrible. There was one stretch where I worked over 300 consecutive days, and every day.
Oh my gosh, that's almost a year.
It was interesting, very different. Then I came back to Brown's, and I didn't like the new owner, and so I went across the street and I took a temporary job at the co-op.
And you said the new owner was
Merle Gribble.
What's his first
Merle
name?
Gribble.
Merle Gribble.
He's since become a great friend of mine, a good friend, a nice guy, great guy. But he didn't know anything about the book business, and it just, I just sort of stepped in where I left off.
And you'd had all this
before.
You'd had all this experience in San
And he
Jose.
just said, well, you don't, we doesn't the way we're in this store, we're not going to do it this way. I said, okay, fine, do it your way, and I'll go somewhere else.
What happened to Mr. Emery?
He was selling out.
Oh.
He wanted to be out.
He was retiring?
He was retiring. He was in his late 70s by then.
Oh.
Anything to get rid of this thing. He was tired of it.
And his son didn't want it?
They all left there. The book business is not the most lovely business on the face of the earth. It's hard work, and it's, well, I can tell you what's wrong with the book business in 2 quick sentences. Book business is the only retail business in the world where you, the store manager or owner, your product that you sell, the textbook, is ordered by somebody else, a faculty member, who doesn't have any understanding of the book business, and it's not his problem. You buy it from a manufacturer, textbook publishers, who dislike bookstores intensely because we sell used books. They're always after us because, you're selling used books, kind of throat. And we sell to a customer who doesn't want to buy the product. Students don't want to buy new books. They hate them. So we got a very unsatisfactory relationship with our customer.
I see.
So it's not a fun business, and that's why we're all any stores in the book business have always had, like I always had a general book department, which is entirely has nothing to do with the textbook department. Our reason for being is the textbook department, but the fun part was the
Yes,
supply
I
department
see.
and the general book department.
So
it is not. It's
so you went from then you went over across the street. You said
I just went to work temporarily and worked a few months, and I was promoted over my boss's objection. I was promoted by the board over his
Who was your boss
Doug Stewart.
at the co-op?
Douglas Stewart.
Stewart?
Yeah.
Is that STEW?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good, great guy. Just died here just a few months ago. Again, another man who ultimately became a good friend, although we were bitter enemies at one point in our career. And I was promoted, and he objected to it very vigorously, but he didn't do anything. But about 3 months later, he fired me, and that was all right with me because it wasn't working out very well. And then John Guy Fawkes, who maybe you know, who was then chairman of the board, came to the house. I had been fired, and I had been looking for work. I'd written to California, and I'd done some other things, and I was looking for work around here. And John Guy came in, and he said, "You've been hired back." I said, "No, thank you, sir. I ain't going back and work for Stewart." He said, "You're not going to work for Stewart." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "We're going to open another store, and you're going to run it independently." I said, "John, it won't work. It just isn't. It's foolish." And he said, "Yes, it will." And he outlined a good program. The board, the old store, they had a little surplus at the time. We were going to finance it. It was a pretty good deal, so I hadn't found anything else I liked, so I took it.
Now this was when it was on the
University Avenue.
Oh, it was on University
Well,
Avenue.
no, the old store. Ask your question again. What's your question?
When you went there from Brown's, where was the
Corner of State and
bookstore?
Lake, but across the street from where it is now, where the library
Yeah,
is now.
it was on the north side of the street, at State and Lake.
West corner, State and Lake.
Okay, so where were they going to open a new one?
University Avenue, right across the
Oh.
street from the hospital.
I see.
And to make a very long story short, I was there a year and a half, and they fired Stewart and hired me to take his place. That was the end of that. So,
I do remember that store. It was near
it was a nice store.
Renabaum's down
I
there,
loved that
wasn't
store.
it?
It was one of the best stores I ever had. It was a technical bookstore. We only had technical books, but
Oh.
then it turned into a little co-op, and then it didn't work out so well. But it was a good store once. We had medical books, engineering books, ag
Oh,
books, all for the
Yeah.
community on that side of the campus and that end of the campus. It was a good store. It did very well. We made lots of money. It was a good store. But that didn't pan out. So then I was hired as manager in 1947, and I retired as general manager, president, general manager in 1978. So I was there quite a while.
7 years ago?
Yeah.
Oh, darn, doesn't seem that long. So that was a long career at the, and it was called the University Co-op at that time.
Always was the core. I insist. One of the conditions of returning to work to the main store was to change the name, because it never was a co-op. It wasn't a co-op from the day it was formed, which was 1892. It should have been. What it was a common law trust, which let's not get into that because nobody knows what I'm talking about.
But you get it. Those who bought books got a rebate.
Got a rebate,
Yeah.
which is wrong. It never should have been. Never should have been operated that way.
Oh.
It was a very peculiar, perverse kind of an operation from the day one. You're talking about State Street. I'll tell you how the thing came about. The store got to be. It's been in 7 locations, but by 1908 or 9 or 10, it was in the 500 block of State Street, where Werman's used to be.
Oh,
Where Pick-a-Book is now, as a matter of fact. And there was a pretty good-sized store there. And the State Street Merchants Society, State Street Merchants, State Street Businessmen's Club or whatever, determined to put the thing out of business because it was a co-op. They didn't like it, and they were offering dividends. And somehow or another, they finagled to get a State Street merchant. Can't remember his name now. It'll come to me. Got him on the board, and he proceeded to do everything he could as a member of the board to put the thing out of business. They also, at the same, in 1906 or 7, another man was elected to the board. His His name was Charles Brown, and he was an officer of what is now the 1st Wisconsin. And he had done some undergraduate work at Harvard, and he knew about the Harvard Coop, which is a very famous, the most famous bookstore, college store in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I use the word bookstore, I'm only talking about textbook stores.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're a different breed than all the other bookstores. And Brown thought that the university should have an independent bookstore, and yet there should be some control of faculty, or somebody should have some control. It shouldn't just be a privately operated store. And Netherwood was the man, the old man. Charles C. Netherwood was the guy that tried to put it out.
State Street.
And he ran a bookstore.
Oh, he did. I see.
Netherwood's was a book and stationery store on 600 block of State Street. He wanted to put it out of business, and it was a pretty crummy operation, really, in those days. Mr. Brown got the bylaws from Harvard Coop and Yale Co-op and Princeton University Bookstore, where he was familiar. And he wrote the trust indenture under which the store operated until 1950. And it was a common law trust, and it was operated originally by 3 alumni. And they had 3 alumni and 1 faculty. Then they added a second faculty member. And then they took off an alumnus and they added a student. And then finally it became 2 alumni, 2 faculty, and 3 students. And they were the managers, the owners, the whatever, of the bookstore.
Oh, they owned it?
Well, sure, they owned it.
Oh.
Because not a penny of the profit of that store, I'm the only person that's ever earned any profit from that store. 2 years I was paid a bonus based on, I guess, profit. Based on profit, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody threw it out because they said, no, this is a non-profit operation. All the money, and that store has earned over the years a lot of money, all the money that it ever earned. The reason it became big and good, and the reason I was able to do something with it when we finally got it going, was because all the profit had to be turned back into the business or distributed in the form of rebates.
I see that.
So that's where the capital came from,
Mm-hmm.
and that store's worth $4 million today.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they've earned. Nobody has ever invested a nickel in that store, not one red cent. And it's got a net worth now of $3,900,000. So it's a big business now. They do almost $15 million worth of business today, and it's a big store and a good one. But during this period, I can't remember now what I was leading up to.
Well, you're talking about it getting
Oh yeah,
started as a.
Well, that's how it got started, and this is how the thing grew, and it got better and better and better.
And when did it moved down to Lake Street?
Moved there in 1928.
Oh.
And it was just the most incredibly unfortunate. They couldn't have picked the worst time. It was impossible. They couldn't, if they had experts planning. If they'd stayed right where they were, they would have made it. But they got the manager. His name was Ed Grady. Bob, you know Bob Grady?
I don't think so.
He's got lots of family here in town. Ed just got delusions of grandeur, and he was going to open this great, big, beautiful new store.
Was it a new building?
Brand new. They built the thing, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the beginning of my problems with the university bookstore. The university, they built in the same terms that the university club was. The university agreed to let them use the land, and both the university bookstore, or the old co-op, and the university club. But the university kept title to the land. And so they built the store, operated it, and they brought in new departments. They got a new men's department, and they brought some of the finest fixtures that have ever been seen in Madison in 1927 and 8. Beautiful store, beautiful fixtures, beautiful lights, and mahogany fixtures, black walnut fixtures.
Had a balcony, didn't it?
Oh God, it had everything. Yeah, it had a balcony and that. It was beautiful. It was. It's a beautiful store. I don't have any pictures of it, but I'm sure they have this one. And then came the big old fat depression, and they went busted.
Oh.
They were saved. Now we're getting back to State Street now. One man, a lot of people had vision on State Street in the old days. A lot of them didn't. But Charlie Andrews was one that saw.
Andrews? This is side 2 of tape 2 of the interview with John Shaw. So you were saying about State Street.
Charlie Andrews operated a store on the square. Andrews and Anderson Spoo, which is now Spoo and Son. And he saw that there were no major stores on Lower State Street. At one time, in my lifetime, or in the 20s, the big corner was not State and Lake. The big corner was the corner of Gilman and State. Wolf Kubley's, the First National Bank. The First National Bank was there. You know, the Groves School. Well, you know where Pickabook is.
Mm-hmm.
Building next to it used to be the First Wisconsin National
I didn't
Bank,
know
a branch of it. They later moved it to Parking University
Mm-hmm.
Avenue. But the big business was on Gilman and State.
Mm-hmm. There were
And
5 corners there.
five
wasn't there?
corners: Wolf Kubley, Lewis Drug, the bank, and Malone's Grocery. They were big operations, big stores, good stores. Then sort of a major shopping center. Oh, and Gaydon's Market. Gaydon's was the other. And a major shopping center, streetcar line went by, Anyway, Charlie Andrews saw that Lower State Street, the campus end of State Street, should be where the business was. So when the old co-op went broke, he got Joe. No. Can't think who used to run Barron's. Joe. Oh my goodness.
Rothschild?
Joe Rothschild, exactly. Charlie and Joe Rothschild and Bill Rendell came to the co-op, which was bankrupt. Frank Ross, the attorney here in town, Frank Ross, and Stevens, was trying. We were bankrupt. The old store was bankrupt, literally. We owed, I believe, they owed something over $100,000, which in those days was just, insurmountable.
Yeah.
And we owed it to everybody. There wasn't anybody we didn't owe.
Now,
Frank
you weren't
Ross-
involved in it.
Oh no.
Okay.
I was too involved. Let me tell you how I was involved. It was fascinating. And indirectly I was involved. I was an employee of Brown's, but I was involved. Let me tell you how. Frank Ross was appointed by the board or by the regents. I can't remember which. Somebody appointed Frank Ross receiver for the bookstore to try to get the creditors to let the thing survive, because the university didn't have a bookstore. See, there was no way, they had no control of it. So,
And it was on their land.
and it was on their land, and it was a very complex deal. And first he tried to get Brown's to buy it out. Now I was working at Brown's at this time, and I remember going over with Mr. Emery, and we would go through things, and he would say, "John, I would take notes," and he would kind of talk. We didn't have toys like this in those days. And he would talk to me, and I would take little notes, and he would look around. And finally, he sat down with his son, I assume he did, and with other people. And at that time, there was another investor in Brown's, Mr. Follett, Charles Follett of Chicago. And they concluded that it was a hopeless mess. The stock was, Ed Grady was a wonderful man, and everybody loved Ed. He was a good-natured, handsome Irisher. But he just let everything just go to hell. He got snowed. Everything went bad. He had. I helped clean up the inventory after the thing was finally settled. Well, anyway, make a long story short, Charlie Andrews talked Bill Rendell, Joe Rothschild, and somebody else to come in there and take over. Charlie took over the men's department. Rothschild, Barron's took over the women's department. I can't remember who took over the gift department. And then they paid money, something for
Like
this.
a concession.
And then they were to lease space from the co-op, and then with the money that the old co-op got, we were to rebuild the book department. And that's when Doug Stewart was hired. This was in 1932. Doug came in. He was just exactly like I was 20 years later. He was going to school and didn't have any money and was scratching trying to make a living. And they offered him the job to run this store and get it out. And he worked like a stevedore, dude. He did wiring, he cleaned, he rebuilt fixtures, he did everything all by himself, no help. He kept 2 employees, Eddie Toppelman, long since dead, and Chet Kretschmann. You know Chet Kretschmann at the hub.
No, I don't know.
He was an old co-op.
How do you spell that, Kretschmann?
Kretschmann.
Oh.
How do you like that?
Oh, good.
Chet Kretschmann. And those three men tried to hold this thing together. Well, Chet gave up. He said, I can't stand this anymore. And Charlie put him to work. Joe Rothschild moved Bill Rendell in, kept him going. And the Yosts were involved some way. I don't recall now. Kessnick said he was there. But I don't remember that connection. And in a couple of years, they kind of got the thing put together. And there was a third store at that time, Gatewood's. And Gatewood had a pretty good store next to the co-op. And he was from Texas, and he didn't like it here. It was too cold in the wintertime, and he wanted out. And the deal was that the Browns and the co-op were to buy out Gatewood's and split the stock. Problem was, co-op didn't have any money. Charlie wouldn't put up any money to put up as much as he could put up. The bank was into this pretty heavy too. And they had a terrible time. But my job was, this is the God's truth, my job assigned to me, I was a 16-year-old, 15-year-old, 17-year-old kid, to follow the co-op employees around to see that they didn't get more than their half of the stock. So we bought the stock.
Oh,
And if
Browns
there were 50
bought the
books,
stock.
Browns and the co-op bought it.
Oh,
And if there were 50 books,
The
we each got
Gatewood's.
25.
I see.
And if there were 200 pencils, we each got 100. And I was supposed to go around and check on the co-op employees. And then the co-op had employees checking on Brown's employees. It was the funniest.
Now, the library was in the Historical Society at
Yeah,
that
the
time.
library didn't exist.
So there was no university library. And was this, what other buildings were there
Nothing.
besides?
Well, there was, next to us was the Taylor Building, and that housed Fred Lohmeyer's bar and a typewriter shop.
This was on State Street.
Yeah, next to our store, 712 State Street.
Mhm.
And then next to that was the Campus Soda Grill. And
Oh.
next to that was Ed Olson. That was a men's clothing store. And that
Well,
was
what
it.
went the other way from along Lake Street to Langdon?
Well, our store went to the alley. That was 180
Oh,
feet.
uh-huh.
And then beyond that, there were 5 big rooming houses.
Oh.
And then on Langdon Street, the last building on Langdon Street was the University Athletic Ticket Office, old house.
Mm.
And then there was a little court there that went from State Street to Langdon Street at the end of the buildings, and down in there were some typewriter shops and stuff, and then the lower campus. And,
Well, was Brown's pretty unhappy about the co-op making a go of it then?
well, they couldn't. I can't speak for Mr. Emery. I never really talked to him about it. They said, Mr. Emery said at the time, he said, I haven't got enough finances to put this thing together.
Mhm.
And
But he couldn't handle all of the
simply couldn't
textbooks
handle it.
anyway.
And the big, what was at issue was what you're going to do with all these men's clothes and the women's clothes and these gifts. Do you remember a beautiful silver shop in Madison that was up on the corner of Francis and State Street? And I can't remember the woman's name. It was the Mouse Around shop was the name, Mosey Around.
Oh.
I always called it Mouse Around shop because there were so many mice in it. But it was a Mosey Around shop, and it was a silver gift shop, beautiful shop. Well, that shop she bought the stock of the old co-op and put it into that store up there next to what was ultimately Mac and
Well,
Will.
I was thinking about the textbook part of it. Brown's apparently could not handle the total textbook business of the university.
They wanted to, but they couldn't. I said they couldn't handle the purchase of the men. See, the old co-op was a department store. Men's clothing, women's clothing, gifts, sporting goods, typewriters, office supplies, everything. And then, incidentally, in one little section, a textbook store.
Oh.
That was the problem. He wanted to have a department store, and his fundamental, his basic operation was going to be textbooks.
Yeah, I don't suppose the university really would have given the land for
Well, that's
just a department
everything
store.
went sour. The whole deal went out. It just was crazy. And Mr. Emery, I know, believed there was no way that he could get order out of that chaos that was in there. So the ultimate solution was uptown buyers came in and bought the old stock and then put in these leased apartments. And then they left one less than a third of the store for the old co-op to run a bookstore.
Did that have a basement?
Oh, sure, huge, same size. It was a big building. That
Seemed
was,
to me I remember going down to the
Oh,
basement
indeed you
there, right
did.
inside the front door.
oh,
on
sure.
Sixth Street.
Well, that I put those stairs in.
Oh,
When it was many years later. That was in 1960.
But it was apparently the store was getting along then during the
Well,
war years
just-
and
during the war years, it was just the one step ahead of the sheriff
Oh.
the whole time.
because the university
Well, there weren't any
student
students
body
here.
was
There
so
was
low.
no students here.
Mhm.
The competition to get, remember there were NROTs, not NROTCs, D12 students were here, thousands of them. And the competition to get the business, their book business, they were here to go to school and they bought books and supplies. The competition between Brown's and the co-op and other merchants around town to get that business got down to so fine where they were making less than a half a cent on the dollar. You know, you couldn't possibly, and it was all done by bid, and the Navy, it was just terrible. And then there was another group in here of Army personnel, and then there were people from Truax, soldiers, the military from Truax. They were going to school on the campus. And, oh, it was terrible.
Yeah,
It was
there
a
were
shame.
wax and waves.
The waves, the wax, everybody. But the book business was a total, complete disaster. And this is what broke Mr. Emery's heart. He couldn't cope with this. He said, I got to get out of this. I'm going to go crazy, if not go bankrupt. Well, everybody held on, and then after, when the war was over in fall of 1945, I came back here. As I say, I was going to go to Brown's.
Well, did the university does not sponsor the bookstore
Absolutely
in any
no
way,
way, shape, or form.
except that it does have a couple of faculty people
Yes,
and
it is.
alumni
The
who are on the
chancellor,
boards.
The chancellor, my relationship, my own personal relationship to the University of Wisconsin in the 35 years that I managed the store was I submitted one report a year to the president and then to the chancellor if that situation changed. And I, after consultation with the chancellor, he appointed 2 faculty members for 3-year terms. And the upshot of it was always that they finally get a faculty member who would accept this crummy job. It wasn't a happy job for the faculty. It was a lot of work and nothing but grief, nothing but complaints. It's like many departmental jobs, you know all about it.
Well, there was no more liaison than that.
That's all.
I remember seeing you at a commencement where.
Well, that was because I was on the Public Functions Committee.
Oh.
I was appointed by the Public Functions Committee to be on the committee because
I
they
see.
furnished the caps and gowns.
Uh-huh.
Oh, Lord, I had a huge job at commencement, but which was to get everybody in a cap and gown, and my responsibility was to see to it that the honorary degree candidates were properly housed, properly outfitted, and that their families had a place to stay,
Oh.
a place to
Oh,
sit
I
and
didn't
come in.
know
That
you
was
did all that.
my responsibility for it. I was on the committee for 35 years.
Hmm.
And
This was Public Functions
Public
Committee of
Functions
the University.
Of the University of Wisconsin.
Mhm.
But they
Okay.
appointed me.
Because you were the furnished the caps and
But I
gowns.
had that job for
Oh,
many years.
uh-huh.
And I was on a couple of other committees appointed. I was on one of the building committees for a time, and the chancellor appointed me for 2 or 3 different things.
Oh,
But not because I had nothing to do with the University of Wisconsin. They didn't pay me. They didn't support the store, except, I shouldn't say that. Young supported the store with everything he had in many ways at a time of great trouble.
But you did.
But
But
no-
the
no
store
money.
just leased the land from the university, and
Yeah, that's all.
that was all. I see. Uh-huh.
And but there was no further connection to the university, and nobody ever understood that. And
No,
we tried 1,000 ways to get people to understand our relationship to the university, including many faculty members.
Well, I'm glad to have that on record because I certainly was never sure about that.
Well, no, there's no place like it on the face. Well, there are 2.
You weren't appointed an assistant professor or anything.
I wasn't. I had nothing. I had no. As I say, I did serve on, I believe, on 3 university committees.
Mhm.
And 2 of those were due to Alden White. He just said, Alden, 2 men that I always dearly loved and greatly admired, Alden White and A.W. Peterson, because they had minds of their own. And they didn't pay too much attention to all this diddly-do hierarchy bit of the university, I never realized, but you know, you step right down the line, and it's very clear cut. Alden didn't pay attention to that. You ought to be on the public convention functions committee because you know more about what's going on with caps and gowns and how to organize this thing and what to do. Who else knows what color a hood should be? He said, I don't know. Nobody knows. You're the only one around here that knows, so you should be on the committee. So he
But
put me on the committee.
this was just a volunteer service of yours then.
Sure. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Lord, no, you don't get paid for any committee work. You know that.
Well, so when you took Stuart's place, then you started making the place over, did you?
I started all over again. We just started from scratch, and slowly but surely, we broke the leases, all the leases.
Oh.
See, I bought out, and my barons sold their interest to Bill Rendell. Bill Rendell sold his interest to Yost, and I bought out Yost. The co-op, the bookstore bought out Yost. And we took over the space and kept moving them out. We kept expanding.
You kept making a better and better profit.
And I closed Charlie Andrews. We came to a parting of the ways. Charlie, well, I won't go into that.
Yeah, that was a nice store. I remember that.
It was a great store,
Mm-hmm.
but I canceled his lease.
Oh.
And I had to have the space. And I bought the Taylor building next door, which is a nice big building. That was 84 feet on State Street, a beautiful building. I bought that building, and then the Yosts were in there again, and I bought them out again. I bought them out twice.
And you had a whole used book store there, didn't
I
you?
had trade books. I did my general book department in there.
Oh,
And that...
So you got bigger and bigger, and of
Yeah.
course the university got bigger and bigger, and
Then we got
especially
into
after
it.
the war.
So I started to look for space. I knew that in I wish I had these dates a little more clearly in my mind. I knew that in 1970, I think it was really 1969, Pete told me, and the chancellor told me, that we would not renew our lease on the land.
Now they had built a new library in the meantime.
They built around us, but they
Yeah.
didn't build in our space.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a terrible fight because the library committee and everybody wanted to move us out then, but I had an ironclad lease, and thank you, Frank Ellsworth Ross. It was an ironclad lease, and they couldn't break it.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't set very well with a lot of faculty. It made me a lot of enemies on the faculty because we refused to. You see, my position was very strange. I was always the university bookstore because faculty didn't understand about this board. So I became, if you were on the library committee, the library expansion committee, for example, and it's that Shaw, he's the one that ruined the design of the library, you see, because he wouldn't give up his lease. So I had some problems with that, but we had a good lease, and we stopped.
You didn't have any place to go.
And we had no place to go. And my other problem was the university promised me, and here, this was A.W. Peake more than anybody else, said, John, you will never have to worry about a home. We will find you a home at the proper time. And then, as I came up with sites, one of my sites, the store offered to buy the University Club, tear it down, put up a new store, and put the University Club on top. That was turned down. We offered to Bill, we had a beautiful offer, a beautifully worked out offer to the library committee to leave us where we were, and we would put any number of floors on top and buy books, all the books they wanted for 50 years. We agreed to that, but that was turned down. The best offer I made, and that was my friend over there, Halverson, when they built Chadbourne Hall. We said it's insane to use one of the best business corners in the city of Madison, Park and University Avenue, for nothing but dormitories. Let us build the basement and the first 2 floors, and put stores in here. And we'll lease them out, and we will lease the space ourselves, and we'll help you pay for them. Oh, no, we'll spoil the kitchen plan. Crazy, just crazy. That knucklehead Halverson over there, Donald, he said, well, it'll ruin our plan. And less than 2 years after they built Chadbourne Hall, they closed the kitchen.
Oh, they did?
It's just
Oh.
that infuriated.
Oh.
Then we negotiated long and hard for the southeast corner of Cork University, under what is now the WHA.
Vilas.
Vilas Hall,
Mhm.
Vilas Communications. And we had a beautiful plan there. Jim Edsel worked on that for 2 years. It was lovely. We would pay for a major chunk of that, went down to, and we tried to buy where the church key is now. We tried to buy that. And then finally I got desperate and I was all ready to buy. We were actually meeting within a matter of days with the owners to buy the corner of Francis and State, where Mack and Moore used to be, buy that building and tear it down and put up a new building. And the university said that was unnecessary. We don't do it, and my board voted it down. I was just heartsick. I just couldn't believe it. $90,000 we could have bought that whole thing for.
Mm.
Then, all this time, all these years of this going on, I've been negotiating with the Lutheran Church because the Lutherans own a beautiful piece of property where our store is now.
It was pretty empty there. It
And
was
it
a
was
big
nothing but a
parking
parking lot
lot.
and a bunch of junk shops and this little bitty chapel. And finally, after years and years of negotiating, we came up with a deal where they gave us the land to use, 2/3 of the land. That is, they allowed us to use 2/3. We couldn't because of a deed restriction. We couldn't use all the land. And the deal was, we will put up the entire building, including the chapel, and give it to you. We'll put it up and pay for it and give it to you in 50 years. And so it's free. And it's working beautifully. It's, so
Well, now I heard, or I should say that Bob heard from a Gribble.
Yeah.
I don't know which one.
Merle, good.
I think the son was the one.
Yeah, well, Jack, either one, he knows it both.
That they had sold that land to the Lutherans
That's great.
with the proviso that it would never be a bookstore.
And it never will be. Except now that the proviso that's run out of time. See, that's why the church is where it is. That's why we're not on the corner, and the church is next to the Catholic Church, which is what it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Gribb had a brilliant partner, a man named Frank Jones, who ran Jones Auto Supply Company. And Jones owned the 2 houses on the corner, the old Scheidler rooming houses. And Frank wanted to protect. He was the silent owner of Brown's Bookshop. He was the silent partner. And he wanted to protect Brown's, and he wanted to keep us forever from moving over there to his business. The only mistake I've ever seen Frank make. And the best thing that ever happened to Brown's if we were on the same side of the street that he's on, you see, but he didn't understand that. So when he sold those 2 houses to the church to make a parking lot, he put in a 20-year deed restriction that said it could not be used for anything but church purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Could not be used specifically. It didn't say that. It said it couldn't be used for any retail bookstores. What it said was a reverse discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
We could have broken it, but we decided it wasn't worth the struggle, and we did a long court suit, and we didn't have time. And we would have probably won, but it didn't make any difference. But the church was very happy. The church said, we're very happy to have our chapel on the corner, and we're very happy.
So was this restriction up by the time you built it?
No. The church. That's where the church is on the deed restricted land.
Oh, so that part of the land is where the church is.
Oh, sure.
Oh.
So there there was an old Frank was going to sue, and I said, measure it yourself. The deed restriction covers 90 by 90 by 90, and 90 square feet. 90.
But the church owned the other
The church
land
owned everything else.
outright and
Mhm.
with no restriction.
Well, they
I
own
see.
they own the 90 by 90 outright too, but
Mhm.
they couldn't build a
But you
bookstore.
couldn't build a bookstore.
Yeah.
I see. Well, that
And they didn't
explains
want
that.
it. The church said the churches don't get into lawsuits, Mr. Shaw. You'll build the church here, or the deal is off. And I said, okay, we build the church here. And it worked out very,
Yeah,
very
worked out
well.
okay.
I got to tell you a funny story. After the bomb went off, when Sterling Hall blew up, everybody was pretty nervous. And probably the most nervous was J. Shaw. I was scared to death because I didn't like that. We'd been set on fire by the Occupiers, and lots of bomb threats and lots of problems and lots of busted windows and everything. And we were ready to sign a letter of intent with the church that this deal was finished and closed. We were going to buy it. And the bomb went off in August 27th. We had a meeting in September
This was in 1970, wasn't it?
1970. And we had this meeting in September, and we were ready. Frank had the lease ready to close. He had the letter of intent, Frank being Frank Ross, who was our attorney for many, many years. Probably more responsible for the saving of the university bookstore than any single person in history when it was down. I went before, our landlord was the Board of Trustees of the the South Wisconsin Synod of the Lutheran Church Pastors Retirement Fund.
Oh.
9 retired pastors,
Oh.
great old guys. They were our landlord. They owned this church and owned the land. See, the little church that's there now it is not a church. It is a student fellowship. And it doesn't have its own constituency. It collects a little money from students. But it's supported by all the other churches in the synod. And it's was until very recently, owned by the South Wisconsin Lutheran Synod Pastors Retirement Fund. Anyway, I went and I gave at this meeting when we were going to sign the letter of intent. I listed 10 reasons why we shouldn't sign the letter.
Well, you should not.
Why we should not.
Oh.
And all as a result of the bomb and all of the
Yes.
problems that we had and all the disruption of the plants and so on. And I said, "No, you've heard this. I've made my statement." Frank Ross was about the color of your sweater. He was just furious. You're killing the deal, you jerk, just furious. And I said, I've said this. Now, I said, I want us to go ahead. I want to sign this, but I want you to know that nobody come back. Well, it just destroys me if somebody comes back and said, "Why didn't you tell me?" Nobody
Why
told
didn't
me.
you point out?
Nobody told me? That just infuriates me. So anyway, this wonderful old man, he was almost in his 80s. He was a retired minister from Peoria, Illinois. He got up and he looked around and he says, "Gentlemen," he says, "Martin Luther was born in 1497. And then he went this long litany of all the tragedies and disasters of the Lutheran Church and Christianity and everything from 1497 till 1970. And he said, 'Gentlemen, I got a feeling the Lutheran Church is even going to survive this.'" And he said, he said, "Before I make the motion and we go ahead, I want to say that I came in with the same reservations that Mr. Shaw had. And if he hadn't brought them up, I would have voted against it." But he says, "Now I vote." And somebody said I vote with some unanimous and bang. So I'll never forget that. It was a wonderful evening.
So then you began the building soon after that?
Well, almost. That was in 1970. We started construction in the winter of 1970.
Well, to go back now to what was happening to the mall, to State Street, and when did they? Do you remember when they decided?
This is all part and parcel of the same thing. You see, the mall. I have to back up here quite a long time. I was on the Traffic Commission of the City of Madison for 14 years. I was appointed by Henry Reynolds, and I was appointed by 3 consecutive mayors. And one of the big objectives of the Traffic Commission, John Bunch and several of us on Phi Mill and me, others, was to get the mall.
To close State Street?
To close State Street and make the mall. And this was bandied, everything. You can't do anything in Madison without getting into a snake wrestle about it, and the mall was certainly no exception.
Were many of the State Street merchants in favor of that?
I believe 3.
Oh.
Out of something like 90. Everybody was opposed to it. And it was a long, hard struggle. My problem with State Street always was that State Street was too narrow. It is a pedestrian street. Madison has terrible problems, exemplified or typified best by the fact that every bus route in the city, every single bus route in the city, runs on the same street or parallel streets for as much as 3 or 4 miles. They're all east and west. We're shaped like a dumbbell. And all these bus lines are going this way. The city wants in the 20s tried very hard, my father was on the committee then, to extend University Avenue from Gilman Street, from University Avenue from Gorham Street, straight through to the square. We'd come out about where the Rain Hotel is, Wisconsin.
Right, straight through
That
to
would have
East
helped
Washington.
enormously, but it just got lost, like the belt line, like the belt line. It takes forever to get it done. So I was always very, very aggressively pro-mall, and that hurt. That hurt the construction of the new building because many of the merchants didn't want to go. Then the university came out finally in very vigorous support of the mall, and then some other groups did too.
Had you seen malls other places that made you see how
Marie,
they work?
we went to Minneapolis, we went down in Indiana, we went to a city just out of Detroit. We went all over looking at malls. And to me, it was the only solution. I am not.
Tape 3 of the interview with John Shaw. Okay, so that was in the 50s that you were talking, first thinking about the mall.
Always thinking about it, and it was a lot of people were. The University Planning Department wanted it. The University Planning Department wanted to do things on University Avenue that the city never approved of. And it's funny, it goes on. Here we are now with the new Assembly Hall down here in Washington Avenue. Same argument, the city, the county opposing the university. And the university often is very progressive in its ideas about how land and land use and street use should be developed. And the mall concept I supported. I did not support the concept that the university wanted to change the concept the university wanted for University Avenue. I've got a letter from Bryant Curl. I'm going to show it to you sometime, where he really blistered me some affairs for my position that buses had. This was over the wrong way bus line. He was mad at me. But the mall concept, to me, there was no way the street could be widened. And the 67 parking lots are just simply not that important.
The parking spaces.
Spaces, yeah. And people are going to have to learn to walk. The merchants, the State Street Charter and Merchant Society, and the State Street merchants, I tell you, they're amazing to me. They only can see what's in front of their store. They can't look up and down the street.
I remember they had to have off-street parking, like Hirsch leaders and others.
Sure.
You could drive in next to
See,
them.
Hirsch leader, you talk about who didn't like it. Stan Hirsch leader left, and he sold out and left. When you're waiting to talk to Herb Eberhard, I don't know if you're going to talk to her. Somebody's going to. He says, he's really raging. And it did change. It changed what I didn't understand then, 20 years ago. I just thought these guys would. Rentschler's, for example, is one that I could come up with. Mack and Moore. Good stores. I couldn't believe that they couldn't get along in this mall. But they all fought the mall so hard that they hurt themselves. I really believe this to this day. To the extent that, frankly, the good stores left State Street. And they blamed it onto the mall. I don't agree with that at all. I believe they should have blamed their own merchandising techniques and their own concepts about how to merchandise on the mall. Now, it's been extraordinarily successful in Minneapolis, It is now in the new Milwaukee Mall, the enclosed mall. Of course, those are enclosed malls, but the concept.
Well, I'm talking mostly about the area down where the bookstore was now, of getting that street closed off totally.
It didn't,
took the university to finally just do that, didn't they?
Well, the university inquired. The city had the university can't. The university has no right of
That's true,
they
but
cannot close the street. That's something they can't do.
But they put a lot of pressure on.
But they can put a lot of heat on, and they did. But the interesting thing is that the engineers, the planners, the professionals, if I can describe them that way, of the city, all wanted the mall. It was the alderpersons and the political types who were opposed to the mall. The technicians all were for the mall. It solved all kinds of problems for them, bus routes and the whole bit. But it was politically it was a disaster. Well,
I I'd like to get into when the civil disruptions began with the students and how things changed in the 60s at the time of the Vietnam War, and what was happening with the students and therefore to the merchants.
I've already told you, and I'll say it one more time. I don't want to get into this very much. I'll touch on it, but it's a period of my life that I'm amazed to realize that I'm still mad about it. I'm still very angry about it, because I have never been able to accept in my mind the fact that so many faculty caved in to the demands of what I'm going to describe, for lack of a better word, the urban radical student.
You think this was primarily led by the New Yorkers in New Jersey?
Not necessarily, no. The most radical kid I ever knew in my entire period through here, the most difficult, the most miserable kid I knew, came from that terrible eastern town of Appleton, Wisconsin.
Oh.
So that doesn't prove anything. I mean, I think the urban student, I'm talking about New York, Cleveland, St. Louis, Chicago, Milwaukee, the urban student as opposed to
The kid from Ellsworth, Wisconsin.
The
Or
rural communities.
the urban student group were the leaders in this thing. There's no question about that. But the students didn't bother me. Boy, don't ever quote me on that to Barbara, because they did bother me. But the thing that made me the most angry was the faculty and the administrators in the faculty, who caved into this and wouldn't stand up and be counted. Now, I remember particularly my first experience with the riots, with the GE riots on Bascom Hill. That was my first experience. I'm going to check this so I got the right date. October 18th to the 21st in 1967. Fairly early on.
Probably noticed some changes in the students before that.
Oh,
then, didn't
absolutely.
you?
Yeah.
The Eisenhower, during the 50s, the students, as I recall, were pretty prosperous and pretty conservative.
They were getting along all right, and as long as the GI group was the sort of the leading group of student thinking, things were pretty cool, calm, and collected, and business-like, if you want to put it that way. Two or three things changed that I remember so clearly. I remember Jack Kennedy's assassination. I remember that very clearly, and I remember considering closing the store because my young people were so upset about that. And I thought, I had a little staff meeting. I said, look, we don't even know if he's dead. What are we doing here? This is crazy. Let's everybody quiet down and
This was November 22nd, as I recall.
Yeah.
What was the year? Was that 60?
Kennedy was killed in November 1963.
63, yeah, because he would have
November
been.
22nd.
He was elected in 1960.
1960.
And of course, there was a big push for civil rights at that time.
Well,
there was
remember
a restlessness.
Remember the sit-ins in Greensboro. That a lot of kids were pretty tight about this. And the other thing I remember, the James Meredith thing. There were meetings and lots of stuff going on at the Union. We got to do this. But what I remember.
And when was Birmingham?
I was in
March.
In Birmingham. That's right. Well, no, but James Meredith was Ole Miss.
Yes.
Another thing that was very interesting. I looked at some old notes to get these notes.
Good.
I remember the DDT hearings here in Madison, which I'm sure you might remember. They were over here in the St. Albans Drug. I remember when Rachel Carson's book came out and what an effect that had on young people. And they were looking around and saying, industry, these manufacturers don't care about what's happening to us. They'll put out DDT and they don't give a damn. I remember Rachel Carson's book, and all through my book selling career in my trade book department, which was my hobby store, I loved to see and watch what were the in books of a given moment among students, because they're great book buyers. This is a great book buyer town. These kids really buy books, and lots of them, and they love them. And I remember Rachel Carson was one of the first books that ever really took off because everybody was reading.
The Silent Spring.
The Silent Spring. It's just quite amazing.
You had big demand.
Then the other thing that made an impression on students that I sensed. Remember, during this time, I was an advisor for my fraternity. I was so-called faculty advisor for the Sigma Nu fraternity. So I had lots of contact with young people. And because I was manager of the bookstore, I probably was invited 15 or 20 times a year to speak to student groups about that crummy bookstore that's stealing all of our money. And so I did a lot of this, and I enjoyed it. It was kind of fun. I also was an officer in the National Association of College Stores during this long period, so I knew what was going on all over the United States and how it was very different. University of Virginia never had any of this. University of California, that's where it started, So while we were, it seemed to me, talking to my colleagues all through the book business, all over the United States, we seem to be the hotbed. Things happen faster here and earlier here than they did in the other part of the country. So I have a dream when Martin Luther King's speech
Tremendous sympathy for the civil rights movement.
Unbelievable. And as I say, when the kids, those 3 boys were killed in Mississippi, none of these had the impact that the GE, as I say, my first experience with a real riot was in 1967, and I'll never forget that. But
now that was General Electric.
that was General Electric, and it was quite a harmless kind of a thing, but it was a.
But they were supposed to be, and the reason for it was that GE was.
They were making something that the students didn't approve of.
I see. I was thinking it was one of the chemical firms, but.
Well, Dow was another one. But that was in the engineering school. That was another riot. I got all down. The Dow one was the one that had got the big noise. But it was the GE riots that started this. That's one when all the kids were hurt.
That was the one that was up at Commerce?
Up in the Commerce building.
Yes, I know Bob says that he happened to drive across campus and saw it.
I was there.
The car was held up.
I went in up to see Harold Kubley. And, I was caught in it, literally, and I was furious about several things, but among other things, one of my associate directors of the Y, I was president of the YMCA board, the University Wide board, and there was one of my knucklehead employees was down there right in the middle of throwing rocks at the cops, and I never forgave him for that. But it was a vicious thing.
Yeah,
lots of kids got hurt.
It snowballed with.
It got out of hand.
With the police throwing tear gas.
The police department got out of hand. The kids got out of hand. Everybody. That's what a riot is. Everybody loses control.
And this was the beginning of the real difficulties on campus.
Let me tell you, the date I've got down, I starred some dates. 1964, June 1964, when the 3 kids were killed in Mississippi. LBJ was elected very shortly thereafter. That's, and then the Tonkin Resolution. All these things, these are the things that were beginning to galvanize these kids. And these kids that were getting uptight about this were, and I'm back to my urban student type. Lots of kids didn't pay attention to this. Lots of them. But I remember the boys in my own fraternity, which ones were excited about this. And then the Tonkin Resolution, and then I remember the Warren Commission report. We had that. We got copies of that. We had thousands of copies. It just went out it was just unbelievable. All by students, because they were deeply concerned about this, and they felt very strong about it, and they wanted to know what was going on. So these are things that I remember. Now, what was happening
And they were unhappy at having those who had to go to the
Well,
the war.
all this time, remember that during this time, by 1966, I dug this out somewhere, there was 385,000 troops in Vietnam. And everybody, I don't know anybody that approved of the Vietnam War. I can't think of anybody that thought it was a good idea. Maybe some
And
rednecks
a
somewhere.
great many of the students in my boys'
Sure.
contemporaries were in school under pressure
Oh, sure.
because if they didn't stay in school they would get drafted, and yet school was very upsetting then.
Horrible. It was a horrible period. It was a horrible period for everybody. And there was a great period of great uneasiness. And during this time, we had all kinds of, I'm going to say trouble with, that isn't quite the right way, but all up and down the street, for example, on State Street, all around this community, we're having all kinds of difficulty with student unions. I'm kind of a pro-union type myself, basically. I'm a dues-paying, retired, honorably discharged dues-paying member of the American Steelworkers Union, CIO, AFL Steelworkers Union.
Are you?
I was a steward in the Steelworkers Union. I understand what a union does. What young people didn't understand about unions, I'm talking about in my own store and on hundreds of other places that I know about in this period. Students looked at unions, labor unions, as a democratic device to give them the management of a business, to take over the management of a business. The people who really found it out first were the restaurant operators. They didn't care whether the kids belonged to the union or whether they didn't. So they didn't do anything about it. Well, the union tried to get organized. They're fine, organized, go ahead. Then the kid would come in and say, well, now we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And they say, well, we can't do that. And then this is when we get into all these difficulties and all the strikes and all the monkey business that we all went through. So this was a period where all this was developing. Students were looking at every student I had. And remember, during this period, I probably had 50 students employed in the store. I had 3 student board members. I was very active in my fraternity until we got kicked off the campus at this time because we were one of the students who said you couldn't belong to one of the fraternities that said you couldn't belong if you wasn't all pure white, So we won't do that. But anyway, I knew all kinds of kids, and I liked them, and I enjoyed working with them up to about this time. But then to me, they got out of hand, and it was partly the labor union thing. The unions during this period weren't doing well. I'm talking about national unions. So the retail clerks unions and other meat cutters unions, they all jumped in on this and looking as an opportunity to get new union members. It was very, very complicated, and the kids were getting all excited about this. Then, plus the fact that they simply got to the point they didn't trust government. Obviously, they didn't. They felt terribly put upon, especially the men, because they were in this very disagreeable situation of, go to school to get drafted, gone to Korea, the whole Korean episode, all this period here. They didn't trust anybody or anything.
They lost the respect for authority too.
Precisely,
I think when they became enemies of the police, then their authority figures were gone. And was this the beginning of the time when they began to dress so sloppily and in sort of rebellion?
Yeah, just the rebellion. To me, the key day was October 18th, 1967. That's when it started. I think that everything really started to go to pot in that time. The thing I did wrong during this period that I remember bitterly, we had bought the Taylor building, which is a building just west of our old store. And the windows had been broken so many times, I just said, I can't, this is crazy. I'm not, and besides...
And why were they broken?
No reason at all. We were a bookstore, we were a highly visible thing, and the windows were big, and I was tempted to throw a rock at them myself, they moved from the ceiling to the ground.
But for years and years, or
I hadn't
for
been broken
20
for
years,
20
nobody
years.
had broken anything.
I might lose a window every 2 or 3 years. I lost every window. I lost every piece of glass in that store twice in about 2 weeks.
Mm.
Every piece of glass, every single one. They just
You had it
smashed
replaced and then,
And that's I said, the hell with this.
and this was just trashing, they called it.
That's
just,
what
just
it was
sort
called.
of,
well, we're going to get the store. We're going to give them. So, anyway, I bricked it up. And that, boy, that's started something that, and I just said, when I didn't think much about it at the time, this is foolish for me to spend. It cost me, I think it cost $3,500 to replace that windows, $4,000, something like that. I said, this is crazy.
Mhm.
I'll just brick it up. You know. What I said at the time was I had to have the wall space, and I had to be very careful to make sure we put shelves. And we did. We put shelves, and they did need the wall space because it was a perfectly square building, and I did use a whole wall.
but did that cause some,
Oh yes, the
resentment?
faculty was, you're doing this oh boy, be careful, John. Not the faculty. Some members of the faculty said, "Well, you're building here a fort," this kind of stuff.
But you did get spray painted, I suppose,
Oh,
on the bricks.
that
didn't
was,
you?
we learned how to handle that. We bought our own sandblasting machine.
Oh,
We
you
trained our
did?
own employees to use them. We had our own spray paint, and the minute it got painted,
Did all of the, this wasn't just your store, but all of those
we got
places along there.
Madison Gas and the telephone company and Kroger's and the University Bookstore got probably 75% of all of the problems that were.
Oh, now I remember Rennebaum's right across the street from you having some
Rennebaum's,
windows.
forgive me, John Sonnenberger, but they were stupid the way they handled it. They did not. And they would run around chasing people because they were spray painting. I said, John, get a sandblaster and blast it off and forget it. And then the next time they do it, wipe it off. But
Weren't there some nights, some evenings when they had marches when
Sure.
an awful lot of windows were trashed up and
sure,
down State Street?
sure. I've seen as many as 5,000 people marching on State Street, throwing rocks in every direction. But
What would set them off to that many people? This wasn't Halloween. This was just
oh no. This is something in the
protesting something.
newspaper. There was some rail. There was a man named Murtha, not Charles Murtha. That's not Murtha. A man named Murtha came into my store, asked for an appointment, got it, sat down, and he said, "I'm telling you that you are to do thus and so and thus and so, or your store's going to be burned out." And I said, "Well, okay, fine. We're not going to do thus and so, whatever it was. And if your store is burned out, I'm going to hold you personally responsible. And as far as I'm concerned, the interview is in it." So I called the fire department in the city police, and we had a long meeting about it. And they knew who he was, and they said, "You'll be interested to know he's done the same thing at Kroger's and one other place." And 3 nights later, Kroger's was burned to the ground. Now,
That was the one up by the square?
no, University Avenue, 600 block of University Avenue.
Oh, I thought that was the A&P.
No,
Oh, it was
Kroger's.
farther down, farther, yeah, okay.
And A&P left there because they had so much damage and so much theft that they just said,
They were in the 900
Hartford,
block,
Connecticut,
I think.
just said, "We're not going to put up with this
Yeah.
nonsense. We're going to get the hell out of here and forget it. They don't care."
So Kroger's was burned.
They were burned to the ground, and it was done with chemicals, and it was done beautifully.
And, yeah, I do remember that.
You
But
bet.
did they catch this guy for it?
We caught him, but they couldn't.
Oh.
We can't prove a thing. This is terrible. And our theft during this period and our damage, in-store damage, was just catastrophic. It went on and on and on. And awful things happened, just the messes they created were just unbelievable.
And this,
Human feces tucked in behind the books and so on.
the theft was increased considerably.
Oh, just
I suppose you'd always
theft
had some
in
shoplifting.
we've always had a little shoplifting. It's never a problem. It's always been there. I mean, as long as there have been stores, there's been shoplifting.
Mhm.
That goes back to the Roman Agora or beyond, I'm sure. That's not a new problem. But during this period, when you're talking about the 60s and 70s, it was astronomical. We just couldn't. We were forced to hire full-time. We had a major chunk of our salary budget was for security. We were forced during this period, we had 24-hour security. We had people in that building 24 hours a day. We were set on fire 5 or 6 times.
Is that
when we
right?
always controlled it.
Inside the store?
Inside the store. The city police had a workstation in my office. Fire department had phones and stuff in my office because we were close and we were in central. And if there was ever a disturbance, it started either on the mall or in front of our store. Stage one. This is a period that the city, the general population knew nothing about. And the decision to call the guard was made in my office. The governor. And
On what occasion?
I'm going to get this one right too. The guard was called by the governor.
This was during a riot?
Yeah. It was right after Kent State, but I can't find it.
I'll put this on pause. Okay.
The guard was called in February 1969. And that was the TAA strike. It started. That was the catalyst.
The TA, the teacher assistant, teaching assistants.
There wasn't any. I didn't note anything here that.
Yeah, the teaching assistants are getting pretty big for their.
They got pretty big for their britches. But the guard was called on February, the morning of. I don't write the date.
Yeah, we were gone that year, but we heard that it was a very bad spring.
Oh, it was terrible. It was terrible. Red Gym was burned in January of the same year. The Chicago 7 rats we didn't have much trouble, but we had a lot of damage, in-store damage. There was another GE strike in February of 1970. Every piece of glass in our store was smashed. Every piece. I couldn't find a door. I couldn't find anything. And that included all by the cashiers. That's the only time I've ever hit a man in anger. I had a kid so hard, I wonder I didn't break my arm. And he was throwing rocks at my cashiers. You know, these are nice women.
This was during the day?
Sure, right in the middle of the day. Oh.
Did they break the glass in the daytime?
Sure. Thousands of kids out roaming the streets, and they just smashed everything they could throw a rock at. When they on that GE strike on February 10th, 1970. There were people in the street. The streets were blocked. There was nobody in it, no cars, no buses, no anything. The streets were full of kids. And all of a sudden, just as though somebody had said, now, in a matter of seconds, every piece of glass in that store was broken. Now we had 64 feet on State Street and 126 feet on Lake Street. And every window was smashed, above and below. Every single one. They didn't miss one. And all in seconds.
Did they use rocks?
Sure.
Or bricks?
Bricks. There they were standing. They had them hidden. They had them in their damn knapsacks. I hated knapsacks to this day.
Somebody gave the signal.
And somebody said, do it. And they smashed every piece of glass.
And then did they...
Then they came into the store.
Oh, I wondered if they ran or if they came in and
No,
stole
they
things.
came in. They came in and tried to steal. And this one kid, there was some glass partitions among the cashiers. This kid was breaking. And I've never hit anybody so hard in my life. To this day, I don't know what was. But that kid hurt for a long time. I can tell you that.
Well, did you have enough security people to watch over the place when?
We never had quite enough. We had
at that time, I mean.
We had my chief of security was August Pieper, who's now captain of the city police department, and he was tough and he was good. And he had a crew, and mostly city policemen and city firemen. And of course, this terrible, the thing that really distressed me about my security, this cordial hatred between my security people and students. You know, my security people hated them, and they'd go after a kid, just like it was just terrible. It was terrible. And so many. Back to my thesis again. So the faculty the faculty that sympathized with this, the faculty who graded on what did they call it, pass-fail, those people were rather sympathetic to what was going on, in my judgment. They never understood my vigorous position. For example, we had if you were caught stealing and were taken to court, we absolutely never would withdraw. That was a company policy, and I almost got fired over it because, among other things, the security people arrested a departmental chairman. They arrested the wife of a very prominent faculty member, both of whom were convicted and sentenced in court. And I get in big trouble over that. They said, "You've got to back off on this." I said, "I'm not going to back off. By God, I'm not going to have people come in here and walk off with my store. I'm not going to tolerate it." And particularly somebody sympathizing, a faculty wise sympathizing with these kids. I said, I won't back off. And I remember I was talking to Ed Young, and I said, Ed Young. I said, I was at one of the Dow riots out on the engineering campus, and I heard Kurt Wendt, dean of the College of Engineering, say to one of his instructors, I don't know yet to this day who it was, he said, "If you have one of these speeches in your class about the war, I'm going to give you my word you'll never teach on this school again as long as you live." And the ag school,
they were a little farther removed from it.
No, they had riots out there too. They had some pretty good ones. But the dean said, "You go no farther. This is it. This is the end. They stopped." So many people stood up. Ed Young stood up. He wasn't going to put up with any nonsense.
No, I remember Bob saying that they they weren't excused absences because they were out rioting. But that was pretty much an ag school.
Glenn Pound, that little, he was a tough little cookie.
Oh yeah,
and,
absolutely.
He was not going to stand for anything.
The students lost out then because they couldn't concentrate.
Then it started to calm down. The Kent State thing, of course, was a terrible day for us.
What do you have the date of that?
Yeah, May 4th.
Was that 60?
Or possibly May 5th of 1970.
70.
May 4th.
Well, before that, the year before that, in the spring when we were gone, I remember the Lloyds telling us about going to some affair at the Wisconsin Center and coming out, and there was tear gas in the air around
tear
it.
gas, my God, I had tear gas every day. We had tear gas was nothing.
There were just groups of students roaming around about to cause trouble all the time, and that was the main way of controlling them. So then the bomb you were talking about, that was in
August 27th.
And things did slow down on...
no, it got tougher, much worse after, for a very short time.
Oh.
But much worse. For example, the bomb was on the 27th. In 1971, this is almost a year later, we started to tear down the little church, the little chapel. We had concluded the deal. And it was all busted up again for destroying the church, big, it was just horrible. And then, of course, on May 6th, I started to barricade the store by, we had to get by a uniformed policeman to get into the store. And,
this was in 70.
1970. Yeah. Those were my toughest days.
Mm-hmm.
Fred Harrington resigned on May 8th, and that was a big fuss. And then on the 12th of May, they firebombed the Commerce Building, and that was another horrible mess up there. Then finally, the guard was around during all this period, but the guard was sent home on the 21st of that month because we were end of the year, and then they had the pass-fail exams. And, all you had to do was show up, and you got a passing grade.
Mm.
And then on the 27th, our Armstrong friends flew up to Sterling. And here, another thing that annoyed me about the university, and its people. Nobody ever admitted what a terrible thing that was until 6 or 7 years later. Nobody told them that it gutted the whole building and spoiled half of the chemistry building, besides killing the guy Fosnick and the rest of it. They, it was kind of a hush-hush thing.
Well, I don't know. I thought that the whole city was really incensed about that.
Yeah, they
And
were,
it was,
but
they thought it was. In fact, across the country, I thought it had somewhat of a cooling off effect because
it
they
had
had
a wonderful effect on the country, but it didn't have any much around here. In 1971, during May, the first nice days of the month, we had all kinds of riots, and all kinds of tear gas, and all kinds of. They really busted up my store. That
They did in 71.
Yeah,
Oh,
sure.
But then they were really trying to put the pressure on the president
that's
about
right.
then.
And then, remember, the May 6th, 1971 was when the kid took the flag down at the top of Bascom. Do you remember that?
No.
Oh, it was a real full-blown riot.
Oh.
It was two brothers that got up on top of Bascom Hall and hold the flag down and set it on fire or something. Then, finally, by 1972, the mall opened in 1972 in March. And there was another riot that day. I mean, it wasn't a riot. It didn't start out to be a riot, but there were so many people marched on the street that it got out of hand. I'll never forget that.
And there were always a few students who were sort of leading this and haranguing the others, I presume.
I said, Ed Young said, many people said, if somebody could give me permission to take 100 kids off this campus, we could have stopped the whole thing. And one of them was our distinguished ex-mayor, Mr. Soglin.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, he was one of the leaders. The worst one, I know, is the kid from Apple. And the second worst one was now a doctor, a very respectable doctor here, sober pastor. He could get more people stirred up faster than anybody ever knew.
Of course, the legislature had a hand in this by suddenly raising the tuition for out-of-state students.
The legislature
cut
did
down
everything backwards. I thought everybody kind of put it, but I didn't. The only thing, I think it was much worse. I think we were much closer to disaster than most people realized. And only those kind of close to what was going on in this thing. And what it did, now let's get back to State Street for a second. It's simply, it ruined State Street commercially. Because the businesses there just said, we're not going to put up with this. We're just going to move out. So today, instead of having some relatively stable, relatively good businesses, you've got restaurants and little, I don't mean to say this in a disparaging way, but I guess I am, mom and pop shops.
Little boutiques.
Just boutiques. And of course, that's a whole concept of retailing that's new. The traditional retailer on State Street, the Square, even in Hilldale, they're going out of style. People, service, personnel, all this is all gone now.
But students for several years, when they were in all those hippie outfits, they weren't really buying new clothes and things.
Well, that's
much
true.
either.
That's very true.
Certainly weren't buying furs.
But
and,
they were buying blue jeans and stuff. Marie, during that period, I had in my lease arrangement with the Andrews Company in the old store, I couldn't sell T-shirts and sweatshirts, Wisconsin bag and stuff. They were all sold by Andrews. The best years we ever had in our whole lives in the clothing business and the rag business, which is primarily T-shirts and sweatshirts, was during the period of those awful ragged days when these kids were
really?
Yeah, sure. They just bought them by the They had plenty of money. They had lots of money. That was just the style. Students, bless their little old hearts. Boy, they're the biggest bunch of lemmings I have ever seen in my life. Something takes off. They all do it now.
And it was just informal dressing. And
I
so on.
love it. And I'm glad that I could go downtown in a pair of chinos and look fairly respectable and nobody thinks anything about it. I think it was the greatest thing that ever happened to American style, that blue jean thing. And if you go down, Barbara and I were on the campus just the other day, and she said, look at the blue jeans, still, thousands and thousands.
But they're not ragged like they were for a while with those patches on. They were really a disgrace for a while.
Those kids deliberately, they dyed them, they tie-dyed them, and they cut holes in them and put patches on them.
And they wore them
forever and ever and ever.
Well, I remember it was was supposed to be a great sight for small town people to come to
Oh,
Madison
sure.
and
Just
walk up and down State Street to
look-
see
look
these
at the children,
awful
right?
clothes that people were
But it
wearing.
had a terrible effect on us. Now, our business was good during all this period, although I was scared to death. In 1972, I thought we'd bitten off more than we could chew. Because
Was this when you were moving?
No, it was the year after we moved. The
Oh.
first year, I expected to lose money, lots of money the first year. We were moving, very complicated. But the second year I expected to come very close to the break-even point. We didn't even come within a mile.
Of course, you had a lot more space and
Yeah, but we had a lot more, we had trouble with it. We didn't know how to handle all the space we had. The theft during that first year was just
oh.
unbelievable. But we didn't know how to control it.
Mm-hmm.
We learned very quickly. But the street itself, I'm so sorry that people like Bill Purnell, good friend, business friend all my life almost, he left.
But I know, I heard or read that these merchants said that their customers just didn't want to come down there.
Because that was the first problem. You see,
They
that's
were
why,
worried about all
Marie,
these
that's why
crazies.
we opened the store in Hilldale. We lost, during this period, all of our mature women customers. They're gone.
Mhm.
They will not come down. You can't park. You're pushed around by these kids, and you are. I mean, there's no kid on earth. Well, there are a few. There's some nice, they're good kids everywhere. I know that. But if you go walking down State Street, a middle-aged woman, you're just as apt to get pushed into a wall as not. You know, they don't pay attention.
Mhm.
So the women stopped trading with us. Now we've got them almost all back in less than 2 years.
Oh,
now.
uh-huh. But Antoine's and
Mary left. She said, "I'm not going to stand. I can't stand it anymore. I just won't put up with
they
it."
just had lost customers, and they were afraid, I suppose, of all
I don't know. Of
problems.
course, Mary, she's very bitter about it, but she had a very fine business down there. But all up and down the street, Fritzy Raggets is still raging about it.
the. Uh-huh.
How terrible it was, how he is. And he's going to pull out as soon as he
Now
can.
that's the shoe store.
No, that's Oriental Specialties. Oriental
Oh,
shop.
I see. Uh-huh.
No, he's no relation to the Shoe Raggets family.
But some of those businesses are now over in University Square or whatever that's called over there. I think
Not left over from State Street.
nothing from
No.
State Street. Uh-huh.
No.
But I
All those
know
businesses are gone.
McNeil and Purnell are now just off State Street.
Yeah,
up
well,
at
just
Gorham.
this year, just
Mhm.
on Gorham State, just this year. But I think it's a terrible mistake. I don't know. Oh, they said, Bobby said just the other day, he said it's terrific. They're doing very well.
Mhm.
John Yost, of course, is in that too.
Mhm.
Now, Manchester's shop on Francis and State is doing well. Chet Kretschmann, when he moved the old C.W. Anders company across the street, he just went down the tube so fast I couldn't believe it. But he didn't change his merchandising. He didn't change his strategy at all. He just kept selling the same stuff they'd been selling for 20 years, and that's what's doing
Those
it
were
well.
those were out for a while. I
Yeah.
think a lot of those things are back in
Yeah.
now. They're buying shirts and ties again.
Not too much. Not
But
too
no
much.
suits.
Suits are
Yeah.
still out. It's until you get to be about 30, 35 now, and then if you don't have a black, dark, pinstripe suit and the vest by your out, you're a freak.
Mhm.
But the stable business, when I see Manchester's gone, all these good businesses, and they're being replaced by these cut rate awful stores
Mhm.
out here in the Verona Road. I just hate stores.
Oh
like
yes,
that.
the discount
No service.
stores. Well, how did you feel about all those vendors out in the mall there?
They never did bother me. I insisted, and still do, and they're finally doing what the plan originally called for. They're being licensed, and they're paying a little bit of the cost. I object to the fact that they don't clean up their mess. They pay nothing up. For example, the townspeople don't know this, but on the university bookstore, it pays for snow removal, for all the cleanup, all the stuff, and the churches do. Everybody has to pay. But these knuckleheads that sit out there with their little dirty little shacks, they don't pay anything. They can pay $5 a month or something like that.
Oh.
Our snow removal bill is going to be I won't say, but it's up in the thousands.
It is.
Sure, for just street maintenance that we have to pay.
This is on the mall
On the mall,
itself.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
And that's
Well, you must
crazy.
share that with the library, don't you?
The library has to pay, Historical Society has to pay, and we've all fought it. Some of them even gone to university and went to court over it, and they've lost. We're still paying an assessment.
Well, how do you like the that bandstand and the noise attendant? Your building is secure enough so that that doesn't bother you anymore.
I don't care. I mean, I believe the function of the mall was to make, to my way of thinking, it's got too raucous, but you can't have. Remember, Marie, the university is a city all in and of itself, and 50,000 people go to school or work in one way or another for the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the extension. 50,000 people. That's a whole city in itself, and they're all compressed into this little bitty space. And sure, they're going to be noisy, and sure, they're going to be raucous. I feel sorry for my friends next door at St. Paul's when they're trying to run a wedding or a funeral or something. They got a rock band out there going just as hard as they can.
But you got to expect the students to have fun, and
But they're supposed to
they
have
did
fun.
all over through all the years. When I talked to the old timers, they used to cut up quite a
The
bit.
bag rush.
Yeah.
My
And
Lord.
homecoming,
St. Patrick's Day parade where they ripped up State Street time and time and time again. But it was only one day. It wasn't quite as bad. No, kids have to let off a little steam. I have no objection. I like the bandstand. I don't. This is what I expected.
It's interesting to come out. I was taking a class last year to come out of the class at noon and have somebody giving haranguing,
that
about
part we don't
religious
like.
harangue.
None of us
and
like
things.
that. The religious freaks are tiresome. The bums are tiresome.
Yeah,
The
but
drunks are tiresome.
But people are finding out what's going on. I mean, that's our free society, I guess.
Well, yeah, but there's some of those guys, that black man that was preaching there, the artist, well, he's crazy. He's absolutely, he should be in an institution. But this is the way we are now. State Street will never be the same. It's never going to come back to what it was.
But that concourse is really pretty nice, I think.
I think it's lovely.
The mile, isn't it?
It's
A
a
measured
mile
mile
long.
between Bascom and Capitol.
And the square is nice, but somebody has to figure out a way to get, of course, Madison. Oh, there's so many things changing in Madison. Just think, insurance, banking, computers. There's Oscar Myers is going to be gone in a couple of 3-4 years. He'll be gone. Won't be. Without Oscar Mayer, this town never would have. We wouldn't have had a Capitol Center. We wouldn't have had a Art Center. We wouldn't have had anything without Oscar Mayer. And yet we're chasing them out of town.
The foundation will go too, do you think?
What do you mean the foundation?
The one that gives the money.
Well, they're already gone.
Oh, right.
Oscar Mayer as a Madison institution is long gone. Now, as long as Oscar and Rosalie live, why, there'll always be something. But not like the things they picked up over the years. Just unbelievable. You can't see Bolts. She's got to be close to. She's on her high 80s now.
Oh, really?
She's a tremendous giver. And, they're gone. They live in. Oscar lives in, for all practical purposes, lives in Palm Springs. He's there 10 months a year. So. The whole nature of this city is changing, and how they're going to solve the problems of the square with the kind of an aldermanic system that we have, where perhaps a third of the aldermen are students or student types. This town's going to be hard to get going again.
Well, during all these the riots and the unrest. Did the State Street merchants get together and discuss what they could do? They didn't. You didn't have
They just fought with each other.
Oh.
We tried. We had an organization, but we would have times we would have a meeting where the 400 block would be arguing with the 300 block, and the 700 block would be yelling at the 600 block. We just didn't. We tried desperately. Oh, I remember we once even. We rented a theater space somewhere and tried to get them all together.
Yeah, you'd think you might have been able to do something if you'd all gotten together. I don't know what. I
have no idea what we could have done. And we couldn't get together because we all had different approaches. And of course, I couldn't say anything because you know, oh hell, you got a Captain Mark. If I heard that one more time, I would have killed someone. You got a Captain Mark. What the hell do you care? You couldn't get rich no matter what you did. Whereas, in fact, the book business is one of the toughest businesses in the world. This guy's, I'll never forget, Charlie Wagner. That was he had a women's shop. He got incensed because of we had the cap and gown business. He wanted to get a piece of the cap and gown. He said, well, it's the Captain Market. He went to the Regents and was up. So I said, okay. I said, let's stop fussing around. Let's give him the cap and gown business. It's nothing but grief as far as I'm concerned. So I called the ER company and said we were going to bow out on our contract. It's going to be taken over by a good, solid businessman, Charles Wagner. So they sent a representative up, and the first thing they asked him for was a $10,000 deposit, cash on the barrel. He said, what are you talking about? You're crazy. These gowns are worth $15, $20 a piece, and I'm going to send up 2,000 of them, and the hoods are worth $1. So he got out of the notion of that. I don't know if it really.
Oh, he decided not to do it.
So he said, I couldn't. He said, I can't.
Did you ever have much trouble with their disappearing, the Captain?
Well, we lose a percentage, but that's built into the rate.
Oh,
You have sure, absolutely.
'Cause I thought they couldn't get their diplomas or something.
That was the lie we spread around, but absolutely not true. A few were stolen, as a matter of fact. The last year I was there, I got a cap and gown and a hood back from a man who said I'd been ashamed about this for 20 years.
Oh. Yeah, there isn't too much else you could use it for.
Well, I don't think there's anything more useless than a cap, gown, and hood.
Right.
I can't imagine anything. You might use if Bob had a student every
yeah,
year.
I know some faculty members did buy their own.
A few did.
Because they marched a lot.
Because they had a lot of students. Really, you should have scored your own student. I think if you're getting his degree.
It's nice. Yeah.
So some of them did.
Well, I know you were pretty tired of the business.
Well, Marie,
you think this was due to the complications of that that period of unrest and
well, I don't think there's any question about it. Well, in the first place, it turned into a workaholic. All I did was work. I didn't do anything at home. My kids, they couldn't understand what was going on. Barbara was very sympathetic, but she couldn't. So I finally said, this is crazy. I'm not going to work like this. I worked for years and years and years. I worked every day.
Saturdays.
Oh, Saturdays. Hell, I didn't mind Saturdays. I worked Sundays all the time. I worked every day. And you can't ever get away from it. And I had some wonderful people working for me. But it's when you get right down to who's going to be responsible, who's going to give you the final yes or no, it always came back to me.
Mm-hmm.
And my bosses, and most of them were wonderful. I had some wonderful bosses. I had Kurt Wendt, I had John Guy Fawkes, I had Marv Shars, Harold Kubley.
These were on your board of directors.
Board.
Mm-hmm.
But they never got paid 1 red cent.
Oh.
And they really, I shouldn't say they didn't care, because they did care. Harold Kubley, he's still worrying about the story. He's been off the board for 20 years. But it wasn't a life and death. They didn't make anything out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So
They
I
were
was
advisory.
pretty much on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And if it had not been for my accountants and my attorneys, I would have left years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody, the answer, when it really got down, push comes to shove, the answer was, well, John, do whatever you think best.
Mm-hmm.
Then the thing that would burn me. Why did you do that?
Yeah.
And I said, where were you, when we were making this decision? So
you got a lot of flack.
I got too much flack, and I got way too much flack from the faculty. I was at Fan Taylor's this Christmas on their New Year's thing, and 2 faculty members there that they jumped me about something.
Oh.
I've been gone for 7 years.
Oh,
Still
they were still blaming John Shaw.
It's still my fault. So
Mm-hmm.
I thought, well.
Mm-hmm.
But much of it I enjoyed. I had a good life in the book business, and I enjoyed it. I'm glad I was in it. I would never do it again. I would go into either private business or institutional business.
But then that's That's because you know what can happen,
Sure.
and things can happen in those too. But this was there was a period
It was,
of
we-
terrible stress for
It was a period of
with
great
students.
stress for many. It was the same. It's interesting, my contemporaries who were in California, they all left early. Wherever there was real disruption on the campus, the people who were in the book business. I don't want to be the center of all this
Yeah,
flack.
at least Madison didn't get into the drug scene like they did out in San Francisco.
No, not
around.
as much.
There
but
is
I think
certainly.
there's plenty of it around here.
Oh, I think there is now, but nothing.
Nothing.
We don't have the.
Oh, mine, no. Nothing like San Francisco and nothing like the Southern California cities do. And New York University did some of those. We started the New York State system. Terrible. It's just terrible. And they've got budget for them. Of course, those stores, see, there's only 10. There's 3,000 college bookstores in the United States. There are 3,000. And there's only 10 that operates. There are 9 now that operate like the university bookstore.
Oh.
Independent, but not independent. They're not operated by the institution that they serve. And yet nobody profits.
There's a liaison.
There's a board, a student board, a faculty board, or a governing board of some kind. And it's interesting that we are the strongest stores in the country. University of Washington, University of Wisconsin, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Texas. Brigham Young.
Well, I'm sure the university is, or at least some people in it are certainly grateful to.
Administration has always liked this arrangement because they had hands-on but hands-off at the same time.
Well, and much of it was due to your being able to bridge the gap between town and down
That
there.
I did pretty well. I actually did fairly well. But I wouldn't do it again.
No, you can't start over, and it's a good thing, and I'm sure you were glad to be out of it now. But you did stay on the board.
No, when I left, I left.
Oh, I thought you stayed on the board of directors.
I had a contract. I had a contract which I honored. But I never... The contract said, if we call you, you have to answer, you have to respond. But I never went down. I never went down and said, this is what I think. If they wanted to know. Now, the contract expired 3 years ago. John Still, we're probably in more communication today than we were when the contract was on. The contract was pretty minimal. I'll tell you what it paid for my insurance. That's about what it paid for. My health and accident insurance, which is the thing I was worried about until I got to be 65.
You retired at 62?
61.
Oh.
And I got it out. And no, I guess it was 62. I guess I was. I think so, 62. But I wanted out. I told him in 61 I was leaving. I said, this isn't done. And I said, select my successor. I don't want any part of it. I don't have anything to do with it. And they wouldn't do it. They never hired anyone. So I hired him myself. I said, okay, you're the boss. Go, man. I tried to help him a little. He was in the store. John Apple been there for 14 years when he got my place. But I found that if I went down, I was still the old man, and that helped undercut him. So I said, this is crazy.
Yeah.
So, but no, I've talked to him 4 times since he got back from the annual meeting or the board meeting where he just was. Well, he got back Saturday, and we talked 4 times about company business.
Oh.
So we have a very wonderful working relationship. And
well, I'm sure your expertise is very valuable. But if they start having riots again, I imagine you'll stay away completely.
I will move out of town if we start getting riots.